Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 501 The Curse of the Giants. Listening to Gaunt's description, Ralph gazed intently at the mural, lost in thought. The so-called powerful enemy was clearly an ancient wizard, and the mural depicted a battle between him and an allied force of wizards, goblins, giants, and centaurs. Hufflepuff had mentioned that the allied forces used some method to cut the immortal ancient wizard into 5 parts and then seal them away separately. So that method was a very powerful weapon. While the boy was still deep in thought, Nit shook his head and said decisively, "I've never heard of this story. In fact, by the time our family settled in Fertile Plains, the giant city had already been lost." Gaunt smiled non-committally, looked up at the mural, and continued, "Regarding the whereabouts of the weapon used by the giants, although there's no verifiable record, there are some vague rumors. For example, it was obtained by goblins and placed in the deepest vault of Gringotts. It was hidden by centaurs, its location concealed in ancient constellations, or perhaps, it disappeared along with the giant city. In short, there are many theories, but due to the passage of time, its whereabouts are completely unverifiable." The old man stood with his hands behind his back, saying calmly, "And nobody knows where it is. Perhaps it's already destroyed," Ralph interjected. "That's possible too, after all, that weapon is stained with the blood of that powerful wizard." Gaunt glanced at the boy and smiled kindly. "Anyway, they're all just vague legends. Who really lived through that era and knows the exact truth? Even the oldest living person today, Nicholas Flamel, is only 600 years old. If you shorten human history to an hour, he wouldn't even occupy a second." Gaunt laughed heartily. "Anyway, I'm just saying this for now, so take it with a grain of salt." For a moment, everyone fell silent. Gaunt walked towards the giant door, slipped through the crack in the stone door, and disappeared halfway inside. He turned and said, "I'll show you around this room." "I dug for a long time to get through this door." Gaunt disappeared behind the door, and the three followed closely behind. Ralph's first impression upon entering the room was the stifling heat. The room was like a giant furnace, making him feel hot all over. He looked up again and saw a square hole 100 feet high, with 2 rows of stone pillars in the center, carved into the shape of giant tree trunks, supporting the ceiling. The ceiling was painted with a brilliant starry sky, overlaid with different lines to represent various celestial phenomena. "This is the winter palace of the giant city. Geothermal energy constantly rises from underground, so the royal family of giants stays here in the winter." Gaunt walked forward, his footsteps stirring up a thick layer of dust on the floor. He warned, "Watch your step, there are giant remains everywhere." Ralph looked down and indeed saw a pile of enormous skulls lying on the lifeless floor, looking as if they had been dead for thousands of years. After walking for a long time, they reached the end of the room. On the steps, there was a huge chair, and sitting on it was an incredibly large, withered, white corpse, its empty eye sockets seemingly looking down at them. The man sitting on the chair is Andalvi, the last king of the giant city, and the skeletons on the ground are also those of royalty. Their deaths led to the complete closure of the giant city, and the brilliant civilization of the giants was utterly lost to the annals of history. "How did they die?" Ralph asked. "A very good question." Gaunt's face showed a faint smile. "When I was excavating this giant city, I pieced together a terrible truth. These giants were all killed by Andalvi. He lured these giants into the Winter Palace, locked the gates, and made them kill each other. In the end, Andalvi also died here." "Is it hard to believe this?" Gaunt turned around, looked at the three of them, and sighed. "But cruelty, bloodlust, and infighting are inherent traits of giants. Otherwise, this race, which once had a great civilization, wouldn't be on the verge of extinction." Gaunt continued to speak. "As for why giants like to kill each other so much, one theory is that it's caused by inbreeding. Giants are few in number, and they often marry siblings or close relatives, which leads to their somewhat extreme personalities. Of course, there is another rumor." The old man paused, his voice aged. "In that war, the giants personally dismembered that powerful enemy, and their blood splattered on him. causing an eternal curse on the giant race. That means they will forever kill each other until the entire race is wiped out. Hearing the word curse, Ralph subconsciously narrowed his eyes. He knew that wizards had blood curses, but he hadn't expected that giants also carried such a terrible curse. It seemed that the price of sealing that ancient wizard was truly devastating. Corvinus, I think we should go back, Nit suddenly said. Tina is still waiting for us at home. If we don't go back soon, she'll be worried. Yes, I have indeed kept you occupied for a long time, Gwant said apologetically. I'll take you out now. The old man raised his arm again, and the three of them gently supported him, returning to the ground. Newt quickly opened his box, preparing to summon the dragon, while Gaunt walked up to Ralph, looking at him with a smile. Ralph, he said, I must apologize for the Time Turner incident. I never imagined my silent one, Thor Crook, would be controlled by Peter Pettigrew with the Imperious Curse, causing you so much trouble. This was my oversight as director of the Department of Mysteries, Mr. Gaunt, the problem is solved, Ralph said calmly. However, the Time Turner has exploded, so what if it exploded? It was just a Time Turner, Gaunt said dismissively. He invited, Kid, I see you seem quite fascinated by giants. How about working for my Department of Mysteries? I have plenty of materials and intelligence here for you to browse. Ralph was quite surprised that Gaunt would invite him to become a silent one. After a moment's hesitation, he shook his head and declined. After graduation, I'd rather be a magizoologist, Gaunt chuckled. I asked your grandfather the same question back then, and he refused for the exact same reason you did. You Scamanders, huh? Goodbye, young Mr. Scamander and Miss Swinton. Gaunt glanced at Ralph, then at Sherry, and finally said with a bright smile, someday, we will meet again. Chapter 502 Ralph, Hermione, you don't want your mother to know you hit someone, do you? Finding the lost city of giants was a momentous event, potentially the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century in the wizarding world. But Newt wasn't drawn to the ancient city, nor did he linger. He left without a second thought, taking Ralph and Sherry with him. Although he had known Gaunt for years, he harbored deep apprehension towards the old man. Ralph felt the same way. Gaunt's identity was incredibly complex, a descendant of Slytherin, one of the first wizards to encounter the basilisk, a visitor to the island, and even a father to one of the sirens. No matter how you looked at it, contact with such a wizard required utmost caution, so it was best to keep a respectful distance. Ralph even suspected that Gaunt was deliberately creating a disturbance to lure Newt and himself, who lived in fertile ground, to meet him. Of course, Ralph also gained much from his conversation with Gaunt, especially information about the weapon. And Gaunt, true to his word, promised not to let the tremors reach fertile ground again, and indeed, nothing happened for the next few days. During this time, Ralph also took Sherry on a tour of the village, visiting each of the neighbors. The ponytail-wearing girl, as a junior, received many precious gifts, making the trip worthwhile. However, the sudden arrival of Minister Fudge shattered the peace once again. Ralph had originally planned to wait until the opening day of the Quidditch match before heading to the camp, but now he had to go to the Quidditch arena a few days earlier. Of course, before heading to the arena, he and Sherry had to pick someone up. London, W1, 7 Charing Cross West, Granger Dental Clinic. A young girl leaned on the counter, yawning and lazily flipping through the Daily Prophet. Seeing her daughter's lazy posture, Mrs. Granger couldn't help but say, Hermione, move away from the newspaper. If you keep slouching like that, you'll become nearsighted soon. Hermione immediately sat up straight, staring at the newspaper with a look of utter disdain, but before she could maintain it for 5 seconds, she slunk back down, slumped onto the table, and sighed, so boring. Didn't you just go to Diagon Alley a few days ago and buy a whole bunch of books? I don't want to read them now. Hermione changed her position, pressing her cheek against the table, looking gloomy, and sighed. Why aren't they coming yet? Who's coming? Mrs. Granger immediately asked. Ralph and Sherry, Mrs. Granger said curiously. Didn't you say a while ago that Ralph went abroad to rescue a ship full of people and was in Berlin for some kind of UN conference? It's the International Wizarding Federation Conference, Hermione grinned. But Ralph is back now. Sherry wrote to me saying that Ralph went to the monastery to pick her up and will come to see me in a few days. Is it to see that rooster race? Mama, it's Quidditch, Hermione corrected again with a laugh. A broomstick race? A broomstick race? Mrs. Granger scoffed. You wizards are so boring, it's like a chair riding contest. Hermione laughed so hard she almost fell over. Mrs. Granger then reminded her, when you go to the race, don't bully Ralph, bully him. Hermione's smile vanished. She jumped up from her chair like a cat with its fur standing on end, pouting in protest. Mama, it's always Ralph who bullies me. Seeing is believing, Mrs. Granger pointed to her eyes, smiling. Anyway, every time I saw Ralph during the holidays, I saw you being so domineering towards him. That's not good. Ralph is a good boy, just too good-natured, a bit too submissive. He just swallows his anger when you bully him, afraid to speak up. You're not allowed to bully him anymore, understand? Hearing her mother's assessment, Hermione felt like crying. Who's submissive? Who swallows his anger? Which of these words applies to Ralph? The girl was preparing to tell her mother about Ralph's 10 misdeeds, how he took advantage of her, how he tricked her into making a bet with him, exploited her, and made her work for free. Hermione had just opened her mouth when she heard a familiar voice from the doorway. The voice, in an extremely aggrieved tone, pleaded, Mrs. Granger, please don't say that about Hermione. She really didn't bully me. The occasional teasing was just classmate banter, nothing like bullying, and certainly not school violence. Hermione looked up sharply and saw a boy carrying a black suitcase standing at the clinic entrance, looking into the room with a wrong expression. Beside him stood a girl with a ponytail, also trying to suppress a laugh as she looked at her. Hermione, no longer caring about causing trouble for Ralph, leaped from her chair and ran towards the door, excitedly shouting, "You're finally here. I missed you so much." Hermione first looked Ralph over, seemingly to check if he had been injured in Berlin. Seeing that he was unharmed and could still perform, she relaxed and looked at Sherry. Hermione took Sherry's hand, and the two best friends jumped and laughed. Ralph entered the clinic and greeted politely, Mrs. Granger, hello, Ralph. Mrs. Granger looked the boy up and down and smiled, you've grown quite a bit taller, you've finally come. Otherwise, Hermione's nagging at home every day is driving me crazy. You must have heard from Hermione. Ralph smiled, I'm planning to take her to a Quidditch match, there are plenty of tickets, why don't you and Mr. Granger come along? We don't understand it, so we won't go for now. Mrs. Granger shook her head, I checked the schedule, we have time on the night of the final, we can go see it live. Okay, Ralph didn't insist, saying, I'll come pick you and Mr. Granger up then. Okay, Mrs. Granger nodded, take good care of Hermione, and have fun too, then we'll be going now, Ralph said. The three quickly left the room, and Hermione immediately asked, what did you and my mother talk about? Your mother said you have a bad temper, a bad personality, and are easily agitated. Ralph rambled on, and told me to be more tolerant. I said, hearing you say that makes me feel much better than Auntie said. Good child, you've suffered. Hermione felt increasingly slandered, and she angrily shouted, I'll fight you. Ralph immediately called towards the clinic, Mrs. Granger, Hermione hit someone. You have to come quickly. Hermione immediately changed to a gentle expression, asking with concern, Ralph, were you hurt in Berlin? Shirley covered her mouth and laughed. Ralph chuckled smugly, saying, Hermione, keep your attitude, you don't want your mother to know you hit me, do you? After walking a few hundred meters more, Hermione snorted, not bothering Ralph any further, but simply asked, how do we get to the Quidditch World Cup Stadium? With a portkey, Ralph said. Minister Fudge contacted me a few days ago. So I asked him for a portkey. He pulled a cup from his pocket and smiled. Let's go. Chapter 503 The Sick Vina. Riding the portkey, Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione quickly left London and appeared in an open field. Ralph was already used to portkey travel, and his feet landed steadily on the ground. Sherry and Hermione, however, felt a little dizzy and stumbled, only managing to stay upright thanks to the boys' support. After regaining their balance, Hermione looked around, her initial excitement quickly turning to disappointment. The scene she had imagined, a bustling, noisy, and crowded place, didn't materialize. Instead, she saw only a misty, desolate wilderness. This is the Quidditch World Cup Stadium, Hermione asked incredulously. Why is it so desolate? It's not the stadium, Ralph shook his head. It's several miles from the stadium and the camp. So far, Sherry asked, puzzled. Why don't the portkeys take us directly to the vicinity of the camp, to facilitate wizards from all over the world reaching the Quidditch Stadium? The Ministry of Magic created many portkeys and placed them in different locations, Ralph patiently explained. Although they are inconspicuous little objects, There's still a chance that muggles might pick them up and accidentally bring them here. If the portkeys were placed near the camp, they would come into contact with wizards and might even hide in tents, making them difficult to find. But by appearing in the middle of nowhere, the Ministry of Magic staff can easily find the muggles and deal with them. Sherry and Hermione both suddenly understood, not expecting such small details. Ralph, recalling the incident of a muggle accidentally using a portkey, suddenly remembered a funny story and chuckled. When I was little, Margaret and I went to a set in a Warburg concert, and a muggle used a portkey and was suddenly teleported to the venue, and then, Sherry asked with interest. Set in a Warburg grabbed that muggle and sang a pot of hot love with her. Ralph clicked his tongue. After the concert, officials from the Magical Congress of the United States used a forgetting charm to erase that person's memory, but when she returned to the muggle world, she still remembered the melody. She later rewrote the lyrics and wrote a song with the same melody, which became the #1 selling single in North America that year. Hermione asked in surprise, "What was that muggle singer's name?" "Madonna." Just as the three were chatting, a familiar voice suddenly rang out in the distance. "You three, hurry up and register." Ralph turned around and saw a familiar figure emerging from the thin mist. He smiled and said, "Tonks, what are you doing here?" "Ah, Ralph." Tonks recognized the boy and exclaimed in surprise, "When did you come back from Berlin?" "Almost a week ago." Ralph looked her over and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Registering you spectators for the game." Tonks waved the thick roll of parchment and quill pen in her hand. "So you finally got fired from the Auror office because you couldn't get a permanent position?" Ralph teased. "What, relegated to the portkey office this time? Don't talk nonsense, I'm a full-fledged Auror now." Tonks pulled an ID card from her pocket with her photo on it. She raised her eyebrows and smiled smugly. "How about that? If you keep making things up about me, I'll arrest you for obstructing official business and take you to my tent, and give you a good beating." Aurors have many torture methods you can't even imagine. Sigh. "It's not like back on the Orient Express when you were begging me to help you solve a case." Ralph sighed. "Now that you're a permanent member, you're turning your back on me. I owe a third of my Auror status to you." Tonks laughed. "Is that all right now? Congratulations on becoming a full-fledged Auror, Tonks." Sherry congratulated her. "Same to you." Tonks winked at the girl with the ponytail and said, "I'll treat you to something later." "That's more like it." Ralph asked curiously, "Wait a minute, what are you, an Auror, doing registration work here?" "We were short-handed, so I came to help." Tonks' eyes flickered. Seeing the boy staring at her with disbelief, she sighed and honestly said, "Okay. I made a small mistake while I was working, and Minister Fudge sent me here." "What mistake?" Tonks hesitated for a long time before saying embarrassedly, "When assigning 10 positions to the Quidditch teams from different countries, I put the Ukrainian and Russian teams next door, and the Israeli and Palestinian teams across the hall. Then, those players started fighting." Ralph was speechless. He really wanted to know if Tonks had done it accidentally, or on purpose. "Oh, right, Minister Fudge said that once you get to the camp, you should go to his tent to find him," Tonks reminded him. "His tent is in the center of the first campsite. It's a 4-story purple tent." "I know," Ralph nodded. "I'll put in a good word for you with Minister Fudge later." "All right." The three said goodbye to Tonks and walked across the desolate swamp for about 20 minutes until the campsite gradually came into view. Hundreds upon hundreds of oddly shaped tents stretched up a large, gentle slope that led to a dark forest on the horizon. Ralph led Sherry and Hermione through a group of tents and soon arrived at a very ordinary-looking tent. He stopped and said, "This is it. You two go in. My sister Margaret is inside." "Aren't you going in?" Hermione asked, puzzled. Ralph quickly shook his head and said, "I'll go find Minister Fudge first." The boy looked through the curtain and, not seeing Margaret, breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, "My sister isn't very bright. You two be very careful." "I'm leaving now." Ralph quickly picked up his suitcase and left the troublesome place, heading towards Camp 1 according to the address Tonks had given him. In the center of the camp, a tent stood out conspicuously, shaped like a 4-story building, with several corner towers and guards at the entrance. Ralph walked to the door and nodded to one of the tall, dark-skinned wizards, saying, "Kingsley, I've come to see Minister Fudge at his invitation." "Ralph, Minister Fudge is in the room, you can just go in," Kingsley said. Ralph carried his suitcase inside and saw a very large office with a soft carpet on the floor, a long black oak table, and dark walnut sofas around it. Minister Fudge was sitting at his desk, writing something. Hearing footsteps, he looked up and exclaimed with delight, "Ralph, you're finally here." Ralph exchanged pleasantries with the minister for a moment, then asked, "How are the magical creatures?" "Terrible," Fudge sighed, "especially those Vila." Hearing the word Vila, Ralph licked his lips excitedly. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. I'll go treat a Vila right now." Chapter 504 The Tough South Korean Team. After Ralph left, Sherry and Hermione hesitated at the entrance instead of rushing into the tent. "Sherry, have you met Ralph's sister?" Hermione asked softly. "No," Sherry shook her head honestly, "I've only met his grandparents, not Marjorie." "From what Ralph said, she doesn't seem easy to get along with," Hermione said with some worry. The girl with the ponytail smiled wryly. From Ralph's description, it seemed he had grown up under Marjorie's torture, but the boy's words also revealed a close relationship with his distant cousin, making it hard to imagine their interactions. "Let's go in," Sherry said softly. Hermione nodded, reached out and pulled back the curtain, carefully entering the tent. Before them was a large living room. It was about 200 square meters, with oil paintings on the walls, potted plants along the walls, and 2 rows of brown leather sofas facing each other in the middle of the room. It looked very elegant. The tent had clearly been enlarged considerably using a seamless stretch arm, but it was commonplace in Ralph's trunk, and neither Sherry nor Hermione found it particularly unusual, even a little small. Suddenly, a click sounded. Sherry looked up and saw a young witch standing on the second floor, holding a camera and taking pictures of them. The witch looked only 18 or 19, with a beautiful oval face, thick, curly blonde hair, and 2 silver earrings. Her gray-blue eyes were bright and expressive. Most captivating were her extremely long, slender legs, encased in alluring black stockings and high heels, which further accentuated her height, making her resemble a proud white swan. Sherry and Hermione, who usually wore only simple, elegant robes, were momentarily stunned by the sight of such an elegant and sexy woman. Margaret ascended the spiral staircase, her gaze lingering on the 2 visitors, especially on the girl with the ponytail. "Hello," Sherry quickly snapped out of her daze and said, "Are you Miss Margaret Kowalski?" "Yes, just call me Margaret." Margaret walked up to Sherry, her eyes scrutinizing the girl with considerable disrespect, examining her face and figure, before finally asking with a smile, "You must be Sherry, Ralph's little helper." Sherry, feeling a little embarrassed by Margaret's intense gaze, replied, "Yes, that's me. This must be Hermione." Margaret then shifted her gaze to the side, smiling slightly. "Ralph said you are the smartest and most diligent student at Hogwarts." "He really said that?" Hermione's eyes widened. "Yes." Margaret's lips curled slightly, then she tilted her head, looking towards the door, and asked suspiciously, "Where's Ralph?" Before Sherry and Hermione could speak, she exclaimed, "Oh," and clicked her tongue. "He ran off at the door without even coming in to see me. That kid, he's dead tonight." Sherry couldn't help but defend Ralph. Minister Fudge called in a hurry. It seemed there was something urgent, so Ralph had to leave in a rush. "It's not his fault." Margaret looked at Sherry again, staring directly into her eyes, a half smile on her face. Sherry suddenly remembered that Ralph's sister was a natural legilimency master. She must have been discovered trying to cover for Ralph. The girl with the ponytail blushed slightly in embarrassment. "Don't be afraid, I don't eat people." Marjorie looked at the blushing girl, smiled charmingly, and clicked her tongue, saying, "Shirley, you're much prettier than in the photos. It's a waste for you to be Ralph's assistant. I'll offer you 3 times the salary. How about you become my assistant?" Shirley shook her head seriously, saying, "I owe Ralph 5,000 galleons and promised to work for him for 50 years. Hermione was shocked. 50 years? "Shirley, did you also make a bet with Ralph and get cheated by him?" "That scoundrel." "No, I did it voluntarily." Marjorie suddenly burst into laughter, leaving Shirley and Hermione completely bewildered. She walked to the sofa and said, "All right, sit down and let's talk." Shirley and Hermione followed behind Marjorie, cautiously observing her, then exchanged glances. This woman, so far, wasn't at all like the crazy, strange person Ralph had described. Wasn't she quite normal? Thinking this, the 2 of them plopped down on the sofa, only to see 2 handcuffs suddenly emerge from between them, binding their hands. Sorry, Marjorie quickly waved her wand, unlocking the handcuffs, and smiled. "This is a little gift I prepared for Ralph. I just forgot to turn it off." Sherry and Hermione exchanged glances again, silently retracting their earlier assessment. Speaking of gifts, Sherry and Hermione quickly took out their own gifts and gave them to Marjorie. "Thank you for the gifts," Margaery said with a smile. "I didn't prepare anything in advance, but consider this a small gift for you too, and it can also be used for self-defense." Margaery opened her purse, took out 2 items, and placed them in Sherry and Hermione's hands respectively. The two stared at the gleaming gun, instantly stunned. Well, Ralph's assessment was clearly correct. Ralph didn't know what would happen after Sherry, Hermione, and Margaery met. He was more anxious to examine Vila. Treating the Vila. The quadrennial Quidditch World Cup, to attract audiences, features a unique element besides exciting matches and thrilling betting: mascot performances. Each participating team brings their most distinctive magical creature as a mascot to the stadium for the audience to perform. For example, Norway's Loch Selma monster, Fiji's Dakurwaga, and Brazil's Curupira are all very interesting magical creatures. Of course, the most captivating is Bulgaria's Vila. After all, the Vila is the most beautiful magical creature in the world besides the golden double-tailed mermaid. However, managing magical creatures is a major problem. These animals live in different environments, and suddenly arriving in a foreign land can lead to acclimatization issues. This time, illness has occurred, and the British Ministry of Magic, having not hosted a World Cup for over 30 years, is ill-equipped and has to seek help from the renowned magizoologist Newt. Newt then asked Ralph to check on the situation. On the way, Ralph casually mentioned Tonks. Fudge sighed. "It's not about Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and Palestine anymore. It's a conflict between the American Quidditch team and the South Korean team." "What happened between those two teams?" Rove asked curiously. The American and South Korean teams were in the same group, and then the South Korean Quidditch team discovered an American wizard had sneaked into the locker room to install listening devices, trying to eavesdrop on their tactics, Fudge said with a worried expression. Now the South Korean Quidditch players are saying the American wizard is disrespecting and insulting South Korea. And they're demanding the American players immediately kneel before the Taejuk flag and repent. Rove's eyes glazed over. For a moment, he wondered which parallel universe he was living in. Chapter 505: The Multi-Talented Minister of Magic of South Korea. The fact that the South Korean Quidditch players dared to challenge the American wizards and even made them kneel before the flag in repentance gave Ralph a sense of unreality. For a fleeting moment, he even wondered if he had traveled back 1,000 years and influenced something, causing a butterfly effect. But surely the influence couldn't be this great? Just as the boy was having these doubts, Fudge had already led him to a stadium. This stadium was specially built for this Quidditch World Cup, but its shape was somewhat strange, resembling a sailboat from a distance. "Isn't the design quite bold? It looks like something out of ancient runes." Fudge wanted to show off his erudition to the boy, but suddenly stopped. When Rove heard the minister mention ancient runes, he glanced at the building's design and raised an eyebrow, saying, "Bet, that's right, bet." Fudge quickly added, "It means home, making athletes and spectators feel like they're at home." Fudge wiped the sweat from his brow, silently repeating the pronunciation several times, inwardly grumbling about how difficult it was to remember. He'd be incredibly embarrassed if he couldn't remember the pronunciation in front of other leaders. "Rove, you're quite good at ancient runes." Not bad. Rove was indeed quite good at it, having studied Nico's notes. Looking at the building, he exclaimed, "In that case, whether from an aesthetic point of view or its deeper meaning, it's truly a bold design. I specifically commissioned the famous magical architect I am paid to design it," Fudge said proudly, as if he had drawn the blueprints himself. "You've heard of I am Pei, right? The guy who built the glass pyramid in front of the Louvre." Rove nodded. "Many French people dislike I am Pei, especially the French Minister of Magic, Abel, who claims that the Louvre pyramid is a scar on Paris's face." Fudge laughed. "That's why I deliberately asked him to design it, so that when Abel comes to watch the French team play, I can infuriate him." Ralph scratched his head. "Well, England and France are sworn enemies, constantly bashing each other in the newspapers, so this doesn't seem wrong." Fudge continued, "This stadium can hold 100,000 wizards, and the Ministry of Magic's 500 staff members worked on it for a whole year. Every inch of this place is enchanted with a muggle-repelling charm. Whenever a muggle approaches, they suddenly remember something urgent and hurriedly leave. It must have cost a fortune, right?" Ralph asked. "It's more than just large, it's several times over the budget," Fudge sighed. "The Ministry of Magic even borrowed galleons from Gringotts for it. We're practically in debt, but as long as this World Cup is successfully held, we'll definitely break even. Advertising, betting, and tickets are all major revenue streams, and they can also boost the local economy. It seems like a surefire way to make money. Of course, the premise is that the World Cup can be held smoothly without any unexpected events. Last year, when Peter Pettigrew escaped from prison, Fudge's heart almost stopped. If the news of such a vicious Death Eater escaping spread, it might deter wizards from attending the games, thus affecting ticket revenue. "I've brought many oars to the stadium," Fudge said confidently. "There won't be any problems." Ralph wasn't as optimistic as Fudge, especially looking at the stadium sailboat shape. He was thinking of the word capsizing. In Professor Trelawney's words, this was a very bad omen. The two entered the stadium and walked up the stairs to a room, where a wizard approached them. He wore a long robe, had a flat nose as if it had been broken, and a pair of round blue eyes and short, blonde hair. Ralph immediately recognized him. It was Ludo Bagman. Ludo seemed very excited, hopping and skipping as if his feet had springs in them. "Hey, Connolly, I was just about to go to your tent to find you." "Oh, Ludo." Fudge looked at the man and quickly asked, "What are you doing here? Weren't you dealing with the dispute between the Korean and American teams?" "It's all settled," Ludo said with a smile. "I just held a mediation meeting and called in Park Chang-ra, the Minister of Magic of South Korea, and the Director of Magical Sports of the United States, and the result, the Minister of Magic of South Korea apologized and denied that the American Quidditch team had any eavesdropping tactics." Fudge was stunned for a moment and said, "That's it." "Of course, that's not all." Ludo clicked his tongue and said, "To ease the tension, the Minister of Magic of South Korea even sang American Pie at the banquet. You weren't there, so you don't know how well he sang. He clearly practiced it." "That's quite a talent," Fudge sneered with some disdain and said, "Didn't the Korean team members want the American team members to kneel under the flag and repent? The Korean team member who wanted the Americans to repent has been permanently banned." Ludo shrugged. "In short, the United States has forgiven South Korea." After listening to Ludo's words, Ralph breathed a sigh of relief. This was the timeline he remembered. Fudge was somewhat disheartened. Back when the Great Ying Empire was still in power, Britain also had a group of such lackeys, but now, with its power waning, they had all gone to serve as dogs for America. He could only console himself. No matter how powerful the American Ministry of Magic is, it's still Britain's son. Seeing that Ludo's gaze kept falling on Ralph, Fudge took the initiative and said, "Come, Ralph, let me introduce you. This is Ludo Bagman, the Director of the Department of Sports and Mobility." "Hello, Mr. Bagman," Ralph smiled. Before Fudge could speak again, Ludo eagerly grasped the boy's hand, excitedly saying, "No need for introductions, the renowned Ralph Scamander. From last year to this summer, the news has been non-stop. Which wizard in all of Britain doesn't know this prodigy?" "Ralph, I'm a huge fan." Ralph raised an eyebrow and smiled. "Mr. Bagman, I'm also a fan. I often study your Quidditch techniques through photos of your past matches." He wasn't just flattering him. In the British wizarding world, Ludo was a household name. He was a legend of the Wimbledon Hornets, the greatest hitter of all time, helping the team win 3 consecutive UEFA Cup titles before retiring his number 58 jersey. As a hitter, Ludo had mastered the art of drawing fouls. Aside from other techniques, his big swing and diving flop alone would be enough for Ralph to study for a lifetime. Especially the diving flop. Ludo could make over an hour of highlight reels. Hearing that Rove was a fan, Ludo seemed very happy and asked, "Where are you going?" "To treat those magical creatures," Rove said, lifting his suitcase. "Oh, then we won't bother you any longer," Ludo said quickly, afraid of catching something. "I'll be going now. I'll go check on the preparations." After Ludo left, Fudge led Rove to a long corridor with many rooms on both sides. Fudge led Rove to a door with a plaque bearing the name of a magical creature, Vila. Rove gasped. According to Fudge, Bulgaria had brought 108 Vila. He was just a few short of some in his suitcase. Thanks to for the donation. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 506. Which cadre couldn't withstand such a test? Fudge pulled his keys from his pocket. Before opening the door, he suddenly turned to the boy, his expression grave and serious. "Rov, there are over 100 Velas locked up in here. This is no joke. Are you sure you can control yourself?" Velas are typical dual-form magical creatures, both bird and human. In bird form, they are terrifying and incredibly powerful. In human form, they are stunningly beautiful and can unleash alluring magic, attracting mates with effects comparable to aphrodisiacs. Fudge didn't want Rov to fail in curing the Velas and instead become bewitched, going berserk in the room and doing something indecent. Yes, Rov was indeed a remarkable genius, but he was still a naive young boy, inexperienced in such situations. Faced with so many beauties, could he really resist unleashing his fury on them? Fudge didn't believe it. "It's alright, I've already taken a calming potion," Ralph said, pulling a small bottle from his pocket and gently shaking it. This potion helps the user eliminate all distracting thoughts, achieving a state of tranquility and detachment. It's the best medicine against charm magic, that powerful, of course. The boy nodded and smiled. "Would you like to take a few drops?" Fudge immediately waved his hand, maintaining a facade of composure in front of Ralph, and said nonchalantly, "No need. Vela's little magic is nothing to me. I don't need any potions to resist their charm." Well, those are the famous Vela, how could they be insignificant? But Fudge had come here privately a few times, always secretly, alone late at night, without any orders. Of course, he swore in the name of the Queen of England that he wasn't here to take advantage of the Vela, but rather out of concern for the health of the Bulgarian mascot. But every time he came, the Vela would maintain their bird form upon seeing him, preventing Fudge from having any evil thoughts. So he was confident he could resist temptation without taking any potions. Thinking this, Fudge quickly unlocked the door and entered the room, with Ralph following closely behind. The boy saw a large cage containing many Vela. They had pointed bird heads with sharp beaks, sparse dark brown linear scales on their necks, and large wings covered in scales. Fudge looked at the ugly birds and sighed softly. Just as he said, what man couldn't resist such a test? Fudge also wanted to make a mistake, to challenge his weaknesses, but these Vela just wouldn't transform into beauties. He had clearly heard that Vela were all hardcore members of the Beauty Association, willing to throw themselves at handsome men. Why was it that with him, not only were they not throwing themselves at him, but they weren't even transforming into beauties? That lovely little woman, Umbridge, always claims to be the most handsome minister in history. The Vevis are a bunch of blind fools, Fudge cursed under his breath, but then noticed the Vevis, upon seeing Rov, suddenly stir in utter excited cries. Their forms rapidly changed, their sharp beaks vanished, their wings folded, their scales transformed into smooth skin, and the bumps on the back of their heads became long, silver hair. Those ugly birds, in a very short time, transformed into beautiful, curvaceous women. The Vevis had fair skin with a faint pink tinge, their large, beautiful eyes like pools of spring water, and thin, red lips that formed a graceful arc. They moved gently, every gesture captivating and mesmerizing. Rov's eyes momentarily glazed over, but quickly regained their clarity. He breathed a sigh of relief. Thankfully, he'd taken the drugs, otherwise, faced with the allure of over 100 Velas, he would have truly fallen for their trap and been squeezed dry. Ralph was alright, but Fudge, who had been so nonchalant and indifferent just moments before, completely lost control. His behavior became bizarre. He stretched and bent his limbs, displaying his muscles, and with a lewd grin, rushed to the cage, trying to grab a woman's arm. The Vela showed disgust, then reverted to her bird form and viciously clawed at Fudge, leaving several bloody scratches on his face. The pain instantly snapped Fudge back to reality. He retreated, his expression shifting from euphoria to terror. Ralph didn't speak, but instead frowned, staring at the Vela who had injured Fudge and refused to give up. She seemed to have gone mad, clawing and punching wildly, her body twisting violently. Fortunately, the cage held her back, otherwise, she probably would have broken free and torn Fudge to pieces. Vela are indeed top members of the Beauty Association, and when they encounter someone they don't like, they usually transform into their bird form to reject them with an ugly display. They wouldn't be this agitated unless attacked or forced into a situation. But Fudge only wanted to grab her hand, nothing more. This stress reaction was excessive. "Did you see that?" Fudge touched his cheek, still shaken. "These creatures have gone mad. Every night, they ram their cages and attack the keepers, injuring several wizards. It's not just Velas, other magical creatures do the same, attacking wizards for no reason. That's definitely abnormal." Ralph nodded. "Can they be cured?" Fudge quickly asked. "If these mascots attacked the audience when the competition started, it would be a real disaster. But not allowing the mascots to participate wasn't an option either, since everyone loved it. "Please go out first, Mr. Fudge, it's too dangerous here," Rove said softly. "I need to examine these Villa's bodies alone to see what's going on." "Then be careful." Fudge covered his face and quickly went out. Rove locked the door behind him and looked at the Villa that were flirting with him. Rove walked to the cage and stared at the crazed Villa. Suddenly, she reached out a claw and grabbed the boy's arm. Rove's mind suddenly went blank. Wild purebred Villa detected, triggering side quest 1, heal the crazed Villa, reward magic, charm and deception, emits a special aura that can drive magical creatures into frenzy and madness, causing them to act strangely. Note, the success rate increases by 40% when used on magical creatures of the opposite sex. Side quest 2, capture a Villa, reward, human-faced bird form, allows you to transform into a bird-like creature like a Villa. In this form, you have a serrated beak, scaly toes, and large wings. You possess terrifying speed and attack power, and can throw flames from your mouth. Chapter 507 Rolf, this Villa is excellent, it's mine now. Villa's sharp claws gripped Rolf's hand tightly, scratching and clawing at his arm, trying to draw blood. However, the boy's skin had turned silvery gray and hardened like rock. Villa's nails snapped, and her claws throbbed with pain. Suddenly, the iron bars of the cage bent to the sides, revealing a large gap. Rolf abruptly raised his arm, grabbed Villa by the neck, and dragged her out of the cage. The iron bars automatically returned to their original position. The strange bird was thus lifted into the air by Rolf. She kicked and struggled for a while, but as the boy tightened his grip, his fingers digging into her neck, Villa's breathing became rapid, and she struggled to breathe. She could only try to stab the boy's arm with her sharp beak, but it was all in vain. Rolf didn't want to kill Villa, he only wanted to investigate what was wrong with her body. He said, "Behave yourself. I don't want to hurt you." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the bird away. Villa didn't crash into the wall, but spun a few times in the air, finally managing to stay suspended by flapping her wings. Unfortunately, she didn't calm down. Instead, she became even more agitated. Long streaks of yellow flame suddenly shot from between her wings, like outstretched claws, spinning and sweeping towards the boy. Rolf impatiently waved his wand, shouting, "Protect your body." An invisible barrier appeared in front of him, the flames rushing towards the armor and exploding with a deafening roar. Countless sparks of fire danced wildly in the empty room, a dazzling spectacle. Villa flapped her wings, swooping down with incredible speed. The magical barrier shattered, and her sharp claws aimed straight for the boy's eyes. Rolf's eyes flashed with a sharp light as he sneered, looking for death. Dazzling flash, his eyes instantly erupted with two brilliant beams of light, illuminating the surroundings. The Villa, blinded by the sudden light, howled and continued its forward momentum, its claws tearing wildly as it squeaked and pecked. Rolf slightly sidestepped the Villa's attack, then swiftly reached out, grabbed its claws, and slammed it to the ground. The Villa was dazed and confused, still trying to flap its wings to attack again, but the boy had already strode over and stepped on its back. Rolf looked down at the frenzied Villa, grabbed its wings with both hands, twisted them, and yanked them backward, cleanly snapping them off. Feathers, scales, and blood mingled and sprayed everywhere. The Villa felt as if her bones were being torn apart. The excruciating pain was like a sharp knife slicing across her spine, causing her eyes to bloodshot and her eyeballs to nearly burst, emitting a piercing scream. The Villas in their cages, looking at Rolf, were no longer the alluring figures they had been. Instead, they were terrified and nearly driven mad, screaming incessantly. The Villa lying on the ground, writhing in pain, also shed her bird form and transformed back into a beautiful woman, lying on the ground, barely breathing. Rolf reached out and wrapped his arms around the Villa's waist, easily lifting her as if she were a child. He then kicked aside the box and jumped inside with her in his arms. The boy, leading the Villa, quickly arrived at a wooden hut. The hut was brightly lit, and the air was filled with a pungent smell of medical alcohol. Inside, there was an operating table and a beeping instrument. Rolf effortlessly lifted the Villa onto the operating table. He waved his wand, and the woman's blood-soaked upper body clothing vanished, revealing enormous breasts. Unbound, her breasts swayed like lotus flowers in water. However, there was little beauty to be found, as blood stained Villa's upper body crimson, like paint had been splashed on it. Rolf turned Villa over, his fingers gently stroking her collarbone, where her broken wing had been. Under the boy's healing touch, the wound healed visibly, disappearing without a trace. Vila, who had been in excruciating pain, struggled violently again after her injuries healed. But suddenly, 4 handcuffs appeared from the corners of the operating table, firmly securing Vila's limbs. The boy walked to a cabinet, took out a potion, and roughly forced it down Vila's throat. "Don't be afraid, it's just a strong sedative to calm you down and relieve the pain," Ralph explained. "Sleep, you'll be fine when you wake up." Vila lay on the operating table, feeling the effects of the drug sweep over her body almost instantly. She struggled against the sensation, but her eyelids slowly closed. The last thing Vila saw before falling asleep was the boy taking a white sheet from the shelf and gently covering her naked upper body. Ralph looked at the sleeping Vila and became excited, preparing to study her physical condition to determine what had happened to her. Standing at the door, Fudge paced back and forth. The bleeding from his face had stopped, but he still covered his face with a handkerchief to prevent anyone from seeing the scratches. Fudge wanted to go inside and see how Ralph was doing, especially after hearing Vila's screams from inside the room not long ago, which made him even more uneasy. What on earth was Ralph doing in there that made such a commotion? Just then, the door suddenly opened, and Ralph, carrying a suitcase, slowly walked out. "Ralph, how is it?" Fudge asked hurriedly. "I caught the Vila that hurt you, drew her blood, and tested it," Ralph said quickly. "It's confirmed that the Vila is poisoned." "Poisoned?" Fudge exclaimed in surprise. "How could this be? What kind of poison, Harriet? Have you heard of it?" Fudge shook his head in confusion. "A magical plant with magical properties, also known as the hyena tree," Ralph explained. "Ingesting the leaves of this plant can trigger mania and hysteria, causing magical creatures to become slightly agitated and attack others like hyenas." "No wonder that Vila attacked me," Fudge said, suddenly realizing. "Someone probably added hyena tree leaves to the food of these mascots, causing them to go berserk," Ralph said. "Could it be an accident?" Fudge asked in a low voice. "It couldn't be an accident," Ralph shook his head. "This tree comes from France, it's a Category A prohibited trade item, and it's hardly ever grown in Britain." "It couldn't be an accident." "France!" Fudge roared angrily. "It must be the French Ministry of Magic. Those Frenchmen are trying to sabotage the Quidditch World Cup," Ralph shrugged non-committally. "Can it be cured?" This was Fudge's biggest concern right now. "Yes," Ralph nodded. "The syrup produced by the sadbug is the antidote for Ariat leaves, and I happen to have some here." The sadbug is a gray, hairy flying insect that produces a syrup that induces sadness. This syrup can be used as an antidote to treat hysteria caused by consuming Ariat leaves. "I don't know how to thank you enough," Fudge said excitedly, trying to grab Ralph's hand. The boy gently dodged, his eyes flickering. "No need for thanks, but there's something I'm quite embarrassed about." "Minister, Rav, what is it?" Fudge patted his chest, assuring him, "No matter how difficult the problem, I can solve it for you. Just now, when I was drawing blood from that Vila for a checkup, she kept resisting, and I accidentally used too much force and killed her," Rav said apologetically. "I'll take the Vila's body with me." Chapter 508 Margaret, "Ralph, shall we go for a soak in the hot springs?" Ralph claimed with absolute certainty that he had accidentally killed a Vila, but Fudge didn't believe him at all. The Scamander family was a recognized authority in the field of magical creatures, and Newt was the greatest magizoologist of his time. How could Ralph, as the person he had designated to treat, have accidentally killed a Vila without even seeing the body? He was clearly the one who had secretly abducted a Vila, and he was making up such a flimsy excuse. Fudge knew perfectly well what was going on, but he had no choice but to accept it. After all, it was just a magical creature, there was no need to be too serious. Just take it away. It was like how the Ministry of Magic knew there was something minor about Newt's trunk, but why didn't they arrest him? It was because Newt was so famous and had so many connections that people turned a blind eye to minor illegal activities. Similarly, Ralph had only abducted a Vila, making a mistake that any magizoologist would make. He wasn't raising a whole forest of magical creatures, who would really investigate? Fudge even considered whether he could use the same excuse to secretly raise a Vila. But considering the Vila would turn into a bird upon seeing him, Fudge quickly dismissed the idea. Ralph, unaware of Fudge's thoughts, was more preoccupied with the poisoning. The hyena tree was an extremely rare magical plant, not easily obtained, and this couldn't be a mere coincidence, it was deliberate poisoning. Even if Ralph concocted an antidote, it would only be a temporary fix if the culprit wasn't caught. Mr. Fudge, who is in charge of raising these magical creatures, the Department of Magical Creature Management and Control. Fudge frowned. Ralph, you suspect it wasn't the French wizards, but officials from our Ministry of Magic. I don't know. Ralph, lacking evidence, wouldn't speak carelessly. He said softly, could you give me a list of the breeders? Of course, Fudge would hand the matter over to the Aurors for investigation, but considering the boy had captured Peter, it would be beneficial if he were also willing to participate. I'll have Amos Diggory, the person in charge, send you a list. Mr. Amos Diggory. Ralph narrowed his eyes. So it was Cedric's father in charge of this. That made things much easier. Speaking of Diggory, Fudge suddenly remembered that summer when Ralph returned from Romania, it was he who sent Diggory to set up a roadblock at the station to intercept him. Fudge, worried that the boy would bring up this, cleared his throat and quickly changed the subject. There's one more thing. The Merlin Medal Award ceremony will be held after the International Wizarding Federation General Assembly. Ralph, as the recipient, you need to attend. Isn't that just a few days away? That's right, it's being held in the stadium, Fudge said excitedly. Normally, the Merlin Medal Award ceremony is held in mid-July, but Fudge deliberately delayed it until August to overlap with the Quidditch World Cup. The reason was simple. At that time, dignitaries and players from various countries would come to England to watch the games, so the Merlin Medal Award ceremony wouldn't be limited to the British Wizarding Circle. There are no permanent ministers. Fudge, though he'd like a lifetime appointment, isn't Dumbledore. He simply doesn't have the ability. So he wants to make a name for himself among wizards from various countries. Hoping to follow Dumbledore's path and run for president of the International Confederation of Wizards. By the way, Ralph, I'll give you a surprise, Fudge said. Ralph was only famous in Britain before, but after saving that ship of wizards, he became famous worldwide. And those wizards he saved were representatives of their respective countries within the Confederation of Wizards, and they would be grateful for Ralph's life-saving act. This was a considerable political resource, so Fudge naturally wanted to cultivate a good relationship with Ralph as much as possible. A surprise, Ralph raised an eyebrow, somewhat puzzled. He was already certain of receiving the Order of Merlin, first class. What surprise could there be? The two quickly returned to the camp. Ralph said goodbye and headed towards his tent. Reaching the door, the boy cautiously peered through the curtain, but didn't see Sherry, Hermione, or Marjorie. Where did they go? Ralph entered the quiet tent, intending to head to the second floor, but suddenly frowned, pushed off the ground with his back foot, and lunged forward. A large iron cage descended from the sky, landing where he had just stood. Before the boy could catch his breath, the floor beneath his feet vanished, and he plummeted into the air. Ralph landed lightly in a dark basement, somewhat speechless. Margaret, why did you set up so many traps in the tent? Of course, they're little gifts I prepared for you. In the corner of the room, Margaret sat reclining on the sofa, her long, slender legs crossed, her right foot, clad in black stockings, gently swaying back and forth on its high heel. Mr. Scamander, there are whips, handcuffs, candles, and stun guns on the wall. Which one do you want to play with tonight, on you, or on me? Ralph asked. Anything is fine, as long as you like. Margaret put a finger to her scarlet lips and said sweetly, we can also play together with the gifts I gave you. Did you bring all those uniforms and shoes? Ralph rolled his eyes and said, I didn't see them. Grandma probably found them and threw them away. You have to be careful. I told Grandma Tina not to come into your room, so she definitely won't. Margaret snorted. You probably threw them away, but it's okay. I still have plenty of uniforms in my closet. Ralph was no match for Margaret, this female rogue, so he changed the subject and asked, where are Sherry and Hermione? They're in the study looking at photo albums. Margaret smiled and said, they're all photos of you when you were little. Ralph's lips twitched. His childhood photos were full of embarrassing moments, since Margaret had forced him to wear women's clothes quite a few times. Margaret stood up, kicked off her high heels, and walked to Ralph's side. Suddenly, with lightning speed, she grabbed a long silver hair from the boy's clothes. She sniffed it lightly, stared at Ralph with a look of utter contempt, and said, on the verge of tears, you scumbag. Isn't Sherry and Hermione enough? And now you've gone out and hooked up with another woman. Who hooked up? Don't slander my innocence. Ralph rolled his eyes. It's Vila's hair. He quickly explained what had just happened. "So you have a villa in your trunk?" Margaret's eyes lit up, and she said excitedly, "Leave it to me, I'll train it for you. I guarantee it'll be very obedient." "No, that villa is poisoned, and it hasn't been cured yet. It's still attacking people," Ralph said. "I'm keeping it to investigate the poison witch, to see if she has any clues. I'll release it later." Margaret looked unconvinced, but surprisingly generously let Ralph go, stretched, and said, "I'm not going to argue with you anymore. Sherry and Hermione are waiting for me. I promised to take them to the hot springs, and I'll also help you check things out in this area." Margaret winked at the boy, stretched out her two white, lotus root-like arms, and suddenly raised them a few degrees, about to grab a heavy weight on her chest. Ralph ignored Margaret's lewd gesture, raised his eyebrows and said, "Hot springs, what? You want to soak with the three of us?" Ralph fled, turning and flying towards the hall. "You have the desire to steal but not the guts," Margaret laughed and scolded. "What a coward." Chapter 509 Rolf, "Shirley, I'll teach you how to shoot." Margaret really did leave Ralph behind, taking Sherry and Hermione to the hot springs. The hot spring was on the 4th floor. It was a very small pool, which Newt had magically brought from the Brazilian rainforest years ago, specifically for bathing with Tina. So, despite Newt's reclusive nature, he was actually quite a sly young man in his youth. In this respect, Ralph really should learn from his grandfather. He also wanted to get a mixed-gender natural hot spring in his trunk. Of course, he could go bathing with Margaret now, but considering the possibility of Sherry and Hermione holding his head down and drowning him at the bottom of the pool, he only thought about it and didn't dare to actually go. If Margaret knew, she would probably scold him again. All talk and no action. Ralph didn't go to the hot spring. He quickly returned to his trunk to brew a potion. The World Cup opening ceremony was approaching, and the mascots were about to perform, so he had to hurry and brew the antidote. Speaking of the opening ceremony, it would be a match between the host nation, England, and Transylvania. This matchup wasn't chosen randomly. Transylvania's world ranking was the lowest among the 16 participating teams, far inferior to 5th-placed England. In terms of total player salaries, the gap was even wider. To paraphrase the famous Quidditch commentator, at Lee, Transylvania is at the level of a lower-tier team in the top 5 leagues, all French players. If Transylvania beats England, he'll eat shit on his head. It can only be said that the two teams are indeed vastly different in strength on the surface, otherwise, they wouldn't have been put to play against the host nation. But quaffles are ultimately round, and a match can't be judged solely on player value. Moreover, anyone who regularly watches the English-Irish Quidditch League Cup knows that British player salaries are largely inflated. Because British clubs require 4 out of 7 players to be homegrown, their market value is artificially high due to the homegrown advantage. Rove quickly arrived at a snowfield and, under a cedar tree, found a nest built of ice. A swarm of gray, hairy flying insects flitted in and out, never stopping for a moment. These were the heartbreak worms, who fed on nettles to obtain a honey-like syrup. Ralph walked to the ice nest, took out a dagger, smashed the bottom of the nest, and retrieved a large piece of honeycomb. At this moment, the heartbreak worms were disturbed, and a swarm rushed out, attacking Ralph, but their stingers couldn't pierce the boy's skin. They could only circle him in helpless fury. Ralph calmly took out a potion, sprayed it around, dispelling the heartbreak worms that were following him, and then returned to the cabin with the honeycomb. Ralph sat in front of a cauldron, held the honeycomb upright, and used a sharp honey-cutting knife, dipped in hot water, to slowly cut the syrup from bottom to top into the cauldron using a sawing motion. Just then, footsteps came from the doorway. The boy looked up and saw Sherry walk in. She had just finished bathing, wearing a bright green nightgown, a faint, elegant fragrance lingering on her skin. Her hair was half dry, loosely draped over her shoulders. Ralph gazed at Shirley, puzzled. "You're done soaking in the hot springs so quickly." The girl gave a soft hum, but her expression was somewhat strange. Seeing this, Ralph chuckled. "Did Margaret try anything with you and Hermione in the hot springs? Is that why you left so quickly?" This was indeed something Margaret would do. She often used to suddenly barge into the bathroom while Ralph was bathing and do indecent things to him. "I didn't touch her," Shirley said, blushing. "It's just that the topics we talked about weren't very proper." Ralph immediately became interested and asked curiously, "How were they improper?" Shirley was shy and embarrassed to say it aloud. Seeing Ralph's repeated urging, she finally blushed and said hesitantly, We were talking about body shape. Margaret said, the right places should be prominent, the right curves should be perky. She even wants to teach Hermione and me some kind of body-enhancing exercise. Body-enhancing exercise? Shirley rolled her eyes at the boy and said in a soft, sweet voice, you don't know? Margaret said you were the one who taught her. Ralph almost spat out blood. That's really unfair. I only taught her calisthenics and eye exercises. I taught you those too. They're all proper stuff. Don't listen to her lies. Margaret said you definitely wouldn't admit it, Shirley said with a half-smile. She also said you're hypocritical, that you secretly like her a lot, but you just won't admit it. Ralph sighed. The shining image he had painstakingly built was about to be completely ruined by Margaret. The boy was still plotting how to get back at Margaret when he saw Sherry suddenly pull a gun from her pocket. The boy was stunned. Why was she pulling out a gun so suddenly? Sherry held the gun and asked softly, this is a gift from Margaret. What do you think we should do with it? Ralph took a deep breath and pondered for a moment before saying, since it's a gift from Margaret, keep it for self-defense. Guns are rampant in America. It's dangerous for young wizards outside of school, and they can't use magic. Basically, everyone has a handgun for self-defense. You can think of it as an American wand. Anyway, it's much more useful than a wand, but I don't know how to use it, Sherry said. It's alright, I'm a renowned sharpshooter. Rove patted his legs and grinned. Shirley, come sit here, I'll teach you how to shoot. Shirley tilted her head, staring at the boy's smiling face, and asked suspiciously, are you sure this is how you practice shooting? Of course, Rove said seriously. You've never handled a gun before, you don't understand. Guns are different from wands, they have recoil. A powerful gun can even break your arm from the recoil. If you sit on my lap, I can help you stabilize your body and reduce the recoil, making it easier to control the gun. Shirley was half convinced, but more suspicious than anything else. She felt that Rove's teaching wasn't proper shooting. But Rove had already reached out, pulled the girl into his arms, and pressed her onto his lap. She struggled symbolically for a moment, then sat limply on the boy's thighs. Rove placed his hand on Shirley's hand, took the hand holding the gun from her, and said softly, you need to release the safety first. Shirley followed his finger and gently pulled the safety. Sight, target. Align the 3 points. The boy patiently pointed to each position, explaining. Shirley aimed at a tree outside the door and tried pulling the trigger as he instructed. A gunshot rang out, bullets raining down, striking the tree with muffled thuds. The gunshot startled a flock of birds perched in the tree. They caught and took flight. Ralph embraced Shirley's slender waist, breathing softly into her ear. Not bad, so accurate on your first try, very talented, keep going. Shirley felt the boy's restless movements behind her, especially the warm touch roaming her waist, which sent a shiver down her spine. She shyly brushed the hand off Rove's waist, tilted her head back, glared at the boy, and asked, weren't we supposed to practice shooting? Yes, Rove nodded, looking into Shirley's wine-red eyes, and said earnestly, so I'm simulating a real environment, deliberately distracting you. See, you're being distracted, aren't you? Focus on your shooting practice, don't pay attention to my movements. The girl didn't speak, only blinked. Her face flushed, she grabbed the boy's arm and put it back on her waist. Shirley fired again, but this time her arm veered sharply, and not a single bullet hit the tree. After emptying the magazine, the girl was limp and nestled in Rove's arms. Her hand loosened, and the gun clattered to the ground. Shirley suddenly turned around, trembling as she wrapped her arms around Rove's neck. She closed her eyes and breathed softly. I'm tired, let's practice again later, okay? It seems your willpower is still lacking. You'll need to practice more, Rove said, lowering his head to kiss Shirley's lips deeply. Chapter 510 The Poisonous Wizard. Shooting practice is indeed a physically demanding activity. So, Ralph and Sherry practiced for 10 seconds, rested for 5 minutes, and continued this stop-and-go practice until they had used up all their bullets. Ralph was somewhat reluctant to stop. He planned to buy tens of thousands of bullets and take Sherry to practice shooting often. Wasn't that much more fun than magic? When the two returned to the living room, Margaret and Hermione had already finished their soak in the hot springs and were chatting on the sofa. Seeing Ralph and Sherry come downstairs together, Hermione looked up and asked, where did you two go? You smell like gunpowder. Margaret sniffed lightly and laughed. Going to practice shooting, that's right, Ralph said calmly, using the gun you gave me. Sherry didn't know how to use it, so I taught her a little. The girl with the ponytail nodded in agreement. Practicing with a gun is good, that thing is better than a wand. Margaret glanced at Sherry's eyes, a half smile on her face. Out of bullets, huh? I have plenty more, we'll get more later. But I have to remind you too, shooting too much can make your arms sore and numb. You two need to rest more while you practice. Sherry knew Margaret was a natural legilimency master, she must have already seen them kissing. So, the ponytail girl gave a barely audible hum, then lowered her head guiltily, too embarrassed to look Margaret in the eye. She was thinking of quickly learning occlumency, otherwise, it would be too awkward in front of Margaret. Ralph didn't share Sherry's worries. Although he didn't know occlumency, he had captured a Baku on the Mayflower last year and obtained its magic, a surge of memories. The boy could construct an incredibly realistic false memory in his mind, with an effect similar to occlumency, to resist legilimency's prying eyes. Of course, even without the magic, Ralph wouldn't feel awkward in front of Marguerite. They grew up together, were too close to be embarrassed by each other, and had seen everything before. Marguerite, a crazy girl who always wanted to take Ralph to the mixed baths, felt even less awkward. She grabbed Ralph's ear and said in a seductive voice, "Ralph, next time you practice shooting, take me with you. The three of us will practice together. I'm a sharpshooter too, do you hear me? Take me with you too," Hermione exclaimed excitedly. Marguerite pinched Hermione's soft cheek, smiling broadly. "I'll definitely take you." Ralph sighed softly, wondering when Marguerite would return to America. Then he suddenly frowned. "Hermione, where are your front teeth?" "They shrunk with magic," Hermione said proudly, opening her mouth to reveal her sparkling white teeth. "They're all perfectly aligned now, aren't they?" "Didn't you refuse to shrink with magic?" Ralph asked, puzzled. "I offered to shrink you before, but you always refused." "I thought you liked bunny teeth." "I don't like them," Hermione pouted. "My parents wouldn't allow it. I always wanted my teeth to shrink, but they wanted me to wear braces. You know, they're dentists, and they think teeth shouldn't be shrunk with magic. Looking good is the most important thing." "Don't you look much better now?" Marguerite smiled brightly. "I'll tell your parents when I meet them." "Thank you, Sister Marguerite," Hermione smiled sweetly. Ralph rolled his eyes. Hermione seemed to have completely betrayed her and joined Margaret's side, becoming her little follower. "All right. Let's go to London before the competition starts," Margaret said, looking at Sherry and Hermione. "I'll take you two shopping for clothes. You're both dressed too plainly. I bought you a lot of clothes before, and they're all with Ralph." "What clothes?" Sherry and Hermione looked at the boy curiously. Ralph was exasperated. "So all those strange uniforms, stockings, and high heels were for them?" "They're all styles Ralph likes," Margaret said with a mischievous smile. "I'll take you to buy a few things." "Margaret, don't buy clothes randomly. They're both still students. Just buy them normal clothes," Ralph quickly said. "I'll pay, including your clothes. Is that all right?" "Is your little savings enough?" Margaret asked. "You don't need to worry about that," Ralph chuckled. "Didn't I tell you before? I have a batch of fairy silverware. Selling just a few pieces would be enough to support the three of you." "Then I won't be polite," Margaret laughed. "You should come too." "I won't go," Ralph shook his head. "I still have to brew potions to cure those magical creatures." This was, of course, just an excuse. He had plenty of experience shopping with Margaret and knew it was a chore. A woman who couldn't even open a bottle of water could shop for hours without rest. It was truly a physiological miracle. After the three left, Ralph started brewing potions in the living room. Soon, the doorbell rang outside the tent. Ralph stepped out of the tent and saw a red-faced wizard with a short brown beard standing at the door. He smiled and said, "Mr. Amos Diggory." "Hello, hello, Mr. Scamander." Diggory shook hands with the boy. Diggory looked at Ralph, feeling quite moved. 3 years ago, he led his men to King's Cross Station to investigate the boy's black box, checking for any dangerous magical creatures smuggled from Romania. Only a few short years had passed, and the once unknown boy had become a wizard known throughout Britain, soon to receive the Order of Merlin, first class. Diggory looked at Ralph and finally understood what it meant to be young and accomplished, and what it meant to waste one's life. He himself was getting on in years. He had truly wasted his life. Ralph, unaware of Diggory's sentiments, simply smiled and said, "Just call me Ralph. Cedric and I are good friends. He mentioned me to you, didn't he?" "Of course, Cedric talked about you," Diggory said excitedly. "He told me About the competition you two were playing together. I told him, Cedric, when you're old, you can tell your grandchildren about this, it's amazing. He fought alongside the famous Ralph Scamander, winning a Quidditch Cup for Hufflepuff. Ralph said modestly for a few moments, then got straight to the point. By the way, Mr. Diggory, did you bring the list I requested? Yes, Diggory said, pulling a document from his pocket and handing it to the boy. There are too many magical creatures from various countries. This time, several departments under our Beast Office are jointly managing them. The Beast Office is one of the 3 departments under the Department of Magical Creature Management and Control, responsible for handling all matters and issues related to magical beasts. Under this office are 6 other departments. Ralph glanced at the list, his gaze lingering on the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Animals. The boy stared at the name Walton McNeil. If he remembered correctly, this man had once been a Death Eater. Chapter 511 Loose Britain. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Animals, as the name suggests, is a committee that deals with magical creatures that threaten the safety of the wizarding world. Walton McNeil is the committee's chief executioner, specializing in executing magical creatures deemed dangerous. In fact, 8 generations of McNeil's family have done this work. Even before the Statute of Secrecy, McNeil's wizards served as executioners in Muggle society. They personally executed numerous Muggles, including kings such as Mary, Queen of Scots, King Charles I of England, and the famous King Louis V of France. Furthermore, a large portion of the ghosts in the Headless Hunters were beheaded by McNeil's wizards. Calling them professionals is no exaggeration. Nick Fury, who nearly lost his head, had one of his most regrettable misfortunes. He wasn't executed by a McNeil executioner. As a result, his head wasn't completely separated from his neck, preventing him from ever rejoining the Headless Hunters. In short, execution is indeed McNeil's ancestral skill. In the original timeline, Walton McNeil was tasked with executing Hagrid's hippogriff attack on Draco. Thanks to Ralph's help, the case was transferred to the Ministry of Magic's Department of Education, clearing Buckbeak of guilt and preventing McNeil from taking action. However, the boy still remembered him vividly. Because he had a hidden identity, a Death Eater. Like Lucius Malfoy, McNeil was a Death Eater who had escaped imprisonment. When Ralph saw this wizard on a list of those who could access magical creatures, he naturally focused his suspicions on him. But suspicion is just suspicion. To turn it into fact, evidence is needed, and before finding evidence, an antidote must be brewed. After Sherry, Marjorie, and Hermione finished shopping, Ralph recruited them to help him brew the potion. The 4 of them worked hard, occasionally practicing shooting, and finally, on the day of the competition, the potion was ready. This finally put Fudge's mind at ease. With the Quidditch World Cup opening match approaching, the number of wizards in the camp swelled to tens of thousands. Long queues stretching for kilometers were common, especially for getting water and using public toilets. Looking at these crowded lines, one couldn't help but wonder, how can there be so many wizards? This was unavoidable. The Quidditch World Cup, held every 4 years, was undoubtedly a must-attend wizarding extravaganza. Wizards worldwide with free time would buy tickets from scalpers at exorbitant prices to watch the World Cup, some even quitting their jobs or selling their houses to raise money. It was truly a matter of faith. The Vietnamese Ministry of Magic did the most humane thing. To allow everyone time to watch the games, they worked overtime for a month straight, without taking 4 weekends off, finally managing to compile a 5-day holiday. This kind of time-off arrangement was incredibly heartwarming, truly the most beautiful Ministry of Magic. With the exponential increase in numbers, various problems arose in the camp. Some people arrived too late, and the good spots were all taken. Their tents were either too far from the stadium and toilets or in terrible locations, leaving them very dissatisfied. Fans from different countries even engaged in real-life offline battles, with Scottish and English fans alone getting into several fights. A closer investigation revealed that Irish fans were secretly stirring things up. Truly, Britain is a fragmented nation, a European mini-Jiangsu. While the South Korean and American Quidditch teams have reconciled, the conflict between Russian and Ukrainian fans escalated, with brawls erupting at the slightest provocation. The night the Russian Minister of Magic arrived at the stadium, the conflict reached its peak. His large tent was attacked by a small toy flying broomstick, nearly setting a flag atop it ablaze. Of course, the Ukrainian Minister of Magic immediately denied any involvement, claiming it was the work of Russian fans. While the physical damage wasn't significant, The insult was immense. Amidst this commotion, the British Ministry of Magic practically moved into the stadium, setting up offices on site. Most of the Aurors also gathered there, raising the security level to an all-time high. Even the pursuit of Peter Pettigrew last year didn't involve this level of activity. Some retired Aurors were temporarily recalled to help maintain order at the camp, but overtime pay was definitely not offered. After all, they were retired and no longer considered employees, nor were they protected by magical labor laws. Besides being cheap, these retired Aurors were also excellent scapegoats. Anyone caught using excessive force could be dismissed as a temporary worker. Anyway, Fudge wouldn't allow any country, region, or dark wizard to disrupt the World Cup. He was counting on ticket sales, advertising revenue, betting taxes, to make a killing. As night fell, lights gradually illuminated the Quidditch World Cup stadium, creating an increasingly lively atmosphere. All the wizards, tickets in hand, headed towards the Quidditch pitch. Tina, arriving just in time, looked at the surging crowd and smiled. "It's been a long time since I've seen so many wizards." "Yes," Nit nodded slightly, feeling almost autistic from being surrounded by so many people. The old man preferred being with magical creatures to Quidditch matches. Even watching ants move house was more interesting. However, taking his wife, grandson, and granddaughter to the match was quite enjoyable. Newt looked at Ralph, then glanced at Marjorie, Sherry, and Hermione beside him, and couldn't help but sigh. There were just too many granddaughters. They went to the top floor box via the VIP passage. There were few wizards there, so there was practically no queue, and they arrived at the entrance quickly. Ralph pulled out a stack of tickets. The Ministry of Magic witch at the entrance checked them, then glanced at the boy, momentarily stunned. "Miss, what's wrong? Is there a problem with the tickets?" Ralph asked. The witch snapped out of her daze and quickly shook her head. "No, Mr. Ralph Scamander, 6 first-class tickets. Please proceed to the top floor box, room number Uranus." "Thank you." Ralph put away the tickets and walked up the stairs. As they reached the top of the stairs, Hermione asked, "Do you know that witch from earlier?" "No." Ralph shook his head. "I've never seen her before." "Then how did she know your name?" "Are there any wizards in England who don't know my name?" Ralph replied nonchalantly. Thanks to the 3 generous donors, a red apricot blossoms over the wall, the Human Emperor, and the Riddler get out for their generous donations. Chapter 512 Ralph, Mrs. Narcissa Malfoy, shall we do something exciting? The group ascended the stairs and quickly reached the top tier of the stands. Almost level with the goalposts, it offered a panoramic view of the entire stadium, making it the best vantage point. Naturally, such a prime vantage point couldn't have too many seats. There were only 8 boxes, each named after one of the 8 planets of the solar system. Led by Ralph, they quickly found the box named Uranus and entered. 2 wizards were already seated inside, Professor McGonagall and Professor Trelawney. Professor McGonagall rose from her chair, beaming. "Newt, Tina, it's been a long time." Newt nodded slightly, while Tina warmly embraced McGonagall, planting a wet kiss on her cheek. "Minerva, it's so good to see you." The 3 elderly women had known each other for many years and were good friends, exchanging pleasantries. Ralph glanced at Professor Trelawney, who was still watching the prophecy ball, and smiled as he greeted her as well. Sherry and Professor McGonagall had a close relationship, far exceeding that of ordinary teacher and student, and Professor McGonagall was also a Quidditch enthusiast, so Ralph wrote to invite her over. Since he had invited Professor McGonagall, he also invited Trelawney. After all, she was a descendant of an old friend, and Ralph, as an elder, should take care of her. Professor Trelawney stared intently at the prophecy orb, her eyes constantly darting to observe Ralph. Although she disliked going out and mostly stayed in the North Tower, she would occasionally read the Daily Prophet. She knew that most seats in the VIP boxes were given away as freebies. Those who could sit there were either extremely wealthy or influential, or had extensive connections or were highly renowned in the wizarding world. Therefore, these tickets were not something you could just buy. The few that had leaked out were rumored to be selling for exorbitant prices on the black market. With Hogwarts' meager salary, even working for 10 more years probably wouldn't be enough to afford one. But Ralph had managed to get so many tickets, almost occupying an entire box, which secretly alarmed her. "And this guy actually invited me to watch the game." Professor Trelawney gained a deeper understanding of this boy who had an unusual relationship with her great-great-grandmother Cassandra. If Rove weren't so young, Trelawney would have suspected that he and her great-great-grandmother were having an affair. Just as everyone was chatting, a commotion suddenly came from the doorway. Rove frowned slightly. Someone was causing trouble in the penthouse box. It couldn't be Malfoy and Weasley, those two sworn enemies, could it? But it seemed that only the two of them would be so confrontational, always wanting to beat each other up. Rove got up and walked out of the box, looking into the distance, and was immediately stunned. It really was Lucius Malfoy causing trouble, but the one confronting him wasn't Arthur Weasley, but Sirius Black. Rove sighed inexplicably. Wasn't this a kind of cuckold? At this moment, Lucius, with his wife and son, was confronting Sirius, seemingly confident because of his numerical advantage. Sirius, I heard from Draco that you bullied him at Hogwarts. Lucius, I was just helping you teach your son a lesson. Sirius smiled, glancing at Draco, who turned pale and took a step back in fear. Lucius immediately flew into a rage. Bullying a 14-year-old? What kind of skill is that? I said I was helping you educate him. Sirius smiled mockingly. This spoiled brat, cowardly and timid, enjoys bullying students, and when he gets disciplined, all he does is yell, I'm going to tell my dad. Sirius mimicked Draco's tone, mocking, just like you when you were a kid. As the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts, I was just correcting his bad habits. You've been locked up for so many years, and those Dementors still haven't erased your bad temper, Lucius sneered. Yes, I envy you having so many good friends who can help you clear your name. It must have cost a fortune, right? Sirius said sarcastically. But your real friends are waiting for you in Azkaban. Bellatrix, her husband Rodolphus, when are you two going in? I'll suggest the minister get you a double room. How dare you speak to me like that, Sirius? Narcissa roared fiercely. It's all right, Narcissa, Malfoy said, pressing her shoulder with his pale, slender fingers to stop her. I think Sirius will be reunited with dear James before we even get to reunite with Bellatrix. These words almost instantly ignited Sirius. He abruptly raised his wand, as did Lucius. The two beams of light collided, producing a piercing sound. Draco screamed in fright, and Narcissa immediately pulled her son behind her. She then raised her wand again, aiming it at Sirius, who was fighting Lucius. Disarm you. Narcissa timed it perfectly, just as Sirius was casting his spell, confident the curse would hide him. But to her horror, her arm veered uncontrollably to the left, the disarming spell, striking Lucius in the back. Lucius's wand flew high into the air, he was lifted off the ground, crashed into the railing, and nearly fell through the gap. Draco turned and saw a familiar boy smiling at them, his face growing even paler. Fight if you want to fight, be fair, don't resort to sneak attacks. 2 against 1 isn't a good habit, Ralph said with a smile. Lady Narcissa Malfoy, how about I play with you? Narcissa tried to struggle, but found herself completely controlled by the boy. Her wrists, neck, and knees seemed to be bound by invisible ropes, making her like a puppet. Ralph grinned. This spell, called Fishing Puppet, was one he'd secretly learned from Lestrange 1,000 years ago. It was a control spell. The targeted wizard would mimic the caster's movements. So, Ralph gently swayed his body, and Narcissa danced along, perfectly in sync with him. Draco, seeing his mother controlled, forgot his fear and immediately pulled out his wand, shouting, "Let go of my mother." Oolong! Before he could finish the spell, Ralph raised his arm, and Narcissa followed suit, slapping her son across the face with a large punch. The force wasn't strong, but it froze Draco. He could only sob. "My father, your father is still lying on the ground," Ralph said softly. "Mrs. Malfoy, how about we try something more exciting? I've studied yoga for a few days, I can put my legs on my neck. Why don't you try it?" If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 513 Harry's Nightmare. Tracing a leg over one's head is a move that demands a great deal of flexibility. Although Narcissa is in relatively good physical condition, she is no longer the nimble and agile girl she was at 14 or 15. Now, let alone standing, she couldn't even manage such a difficult pose while lying in bed. So, when she saw Scamander slowly raise his leg, Narcissa was horrified. If the boy forced her into that position, her neck or her leg would break first. Narcissa wanted to scream and tell Scamander to stop, but her body was completely controlled by the boy, and she couldn't speak, only making meaningless whimpering noises. Rolf raised his leg, then gently lowered it again. He manipulated Narcissa's body like a puppet, remotely controlling her to dance a few waltz steps before offering a slight smile. "Relax, Mrs. Malfoy. Your son Draco and I are classmates, and he's also a regular customer of mine. We're not exactly best friends, but we're all right. For his sake, I won't hurt you." However, the boy's tone shifted, his voice growing colder. "You'd better not launch any more sneak attacks. Just quietly watch your husband and your cousin fight. How about that? Blink if you're okay with it, Mom. Please don't interfere anymore," Draco quickly pleaded. Otherwise, Scamander really won't be polite. The best outcome was for Rolf and his mother not to fight, otherwise, she would definitely suffer a great loss. Draco knew this all too well. Narcissa's chest heaved with anger. "Your mother's body is being controlled by Scamander, and instead of helping to attack him, you're telling me to be patient? What a good son." Despite her thoughts, Narcissa blinked hard, and then found that she could suddenly move. The boy glanced at her, and Narcissa froze, no longer daring to attack Sirius. The battle between Lucius and Sirius quickly came to an end. Lucius was knocked to the ground by Sirius's magic, then grabbed his robe and dragged him to the railing. Lucius frantically reached out to grab the railing, but it slipped away immediately. He quickly grabbed it tightly with his other hand. However, his body was still dangling in midair. If Sirius gave him a push, he would immediately fall. "Sirius!" Narcissa cried out in terror. "No, he's your brother-in-law." "Brother-in-law?" Sirius sneered. "Narcissa, you remember you're my cousin now. When your sister Andromeda and I were erased from the family tree, why didn't you remember that? When your husband ambushed me as a Death Eater, why didn't you remember that?" Sirius pulled Lucius back, slammed him to the ground, and slapped him again, mocking, "Lucius, you're a coward too, only good for hiding under women's skirts. Get lost, don't let me see you again." Whether it was the slap or the provocation of his words, Lucius's face flushed crimson. Draco and Narcissa rushed over, helped Lucius up, and led him, limping, toward their private box. "Lucius, are you alright?" Narcissa asked cautiously. "I'm fine," Lucius rubbed his cheek and asked, "And you, Narcissa, are you hurt?" Being easily controlled by Scamander and threatened by him, unable to help her husband, all of this made Narcissa feel incredibly humiliated. However, not wanting her husband to worry, she shook her head and said, "No, Scamander didn't hurt me, he was quite polite." Lucius breathed a sigh of relief and then sneered, "Black, this isn't over." After the three figures disappeared, Ralph said softly, "Sirius, you shouldn't have gotten into conflict with Malfoy here. It wasn't wise, it was indeed very unwise." This was the Quidditch World Cup stadium, surrounded by wizards. In broad daylight, he couldn't possibly throw Malfoy off the roof, he might even kill him. And Malfoy's side had more people. If Ralph hadn't appeared, Sirius would probably have been at a disadvantage. "I couldn't help it for a moment," Sirius said gratefully. "Ralph, thank you for helping me, but you might have earned Malfoy's wrath. Malfoy has held a grudge against me for a long time. I stopped him from the Chamber of Secrets 2 years ago, which caused him to lose his position as school board member." Ralph smiled slightly, unconcerned. "Last year, the Hippogriff injured his son, and he wanted to kill Buckbeak, but I cleared his name. We'll meet again on the battlefield sooner or later. If I offend Malfoy a little more today, I won't feel guilty about using dirty tricks on him in the future." Sirius smiled, looking at Ralph with appreciation. Even without Ralph clearing his name, Sirius found the boy quite agreeable. "Ralph, which box are you in? Would you like to sit with us?" Sirius invited. "I have Harry and some Weasley kids with me. It's quite lively. They were talking about you earlier, about how you saved the flying dragon ship." "No need," Ralph shook his head. "I'm sitting with my grandparents and a few friends. There are quite a few of us, and your box definitely won't be big enough." "But," the boy suddenly lowered his voice. "There's something, Sirius, that I need you to take a look at." "What is it?" Ralph pulled a piece of parchment from his pocket and handed it to Sirius. "Can you take a look and see which Death Eaters you know are listed here?" Ralph knew Walton McNeil was a Death Eater, but that was all he knew. There were probably many more Death Eaters he had overlooked. Sirius, who had fought against Death Eaters before, undoubtedly knew more about them. Sure enough, after only a cursory glance, Sirius found 2 more who had slipped through the net. There were many such people, They all claimed after the war that they had been afflicted by the imperious curse, thus escaping punishment. "Rolf, if you're not in a hurry, I'll consult Remus again," Sirius said. "When I was imprisoned, I missed quite a few trials, and I might have overlooked some people." Rolf nodded slightly, then suddenly asked, "How is Harry doing lately?" "Not so good. I took Harry away from his aunt's house a long time ago and went to Black's old house." Sirius frowned. "However, I don't know if it's because the old house is too eerie, or if Harry is a bit sensitive to his bed, but he's been having nightmares lately." "What kind of nightmares?" "Harry dreams of a very cold, damp place, always surrounded by gray mist, and people talking and crying, but I can't hear them clearly." "Harry also keeps dreaming of Lily Potter." "That's right," Sirius nodded. "Harry has been dreaming of his mother lately." Rolf didn't speak, but narrowed his eyes slightly, lost in thought. Chapter 514 Quidditch Opening Match. Since using the time turner to travel back to last Halloween and force Voldemort to self-destruct, Ralph hasn't seen the Dark Lord again. As his fervent fan, or rather, a die-hard fan, Ralph desperately wants to know what his idol is up to. In the original timeline, the Dark Lord would have encountered Peter Pettigrew at this point in time, obtained information about Barty Rock Jr. through torturing Bertha Jorkins, and finally returned to Riddle House, to remain humble and await his destiny. But due to Ralph's influence, Peter Pettigrew has already been brought to justice, and none of the subsequent events can be repeated. So where has Voldemort gone? Has he found a new servant? Is he wandering around England, or has he returned to the depths of the Albanian forests to continue waiting for his destined one? Ralph is eager to know Tom's current situation. Although it sounds far-fetched, at times like this, the most reliable source of information is Harry. More accurately, Harry's dream. Whenever Voldemort was active, the fragment of soul in Harry's forehead would try to return to his body. Through this connection, Harry could enter Voldemort's mind and secretly observe his every move. Calling Harry a pinhole camera and Voldemort a Mr. Tom from the domestic Quidditch world wouldn't be an exaggeration. Therefore, before Mr. Tom realized Harry's camera, his dreams were the most reliable source of information. However, dreaming of a very cold and damp environment was too vague a description. Dreaming of Lily, on the other hand, was slightly more substantial information. Ralph and Sirius chatted for a while, returning to their box just before the match was about to begin. At this moment, commentator Ludo Bagman's deep voice resounded throughout the packed stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the 422nd Quidditch World Cup opening match." The audience erupted in cheers and applause. Tens of thousands of flags waved simultaneously, accompanied by a jumbled mess of national anthems. The whiteboard was flashing with numerous advertising slogans: "Convenience stick, the wizard's magic wand, poke it before bed and your constipation will disappear. It's the #1 enema product in a gallon, hair growth tonic, the British man's miracle water. Apply it daily and your bald spot will turn green." As Ludo finished his opening remarks, the advertisements finally disappeared, and the score was now displayed: England 0, Transylvania 0. Just then, a wizard flew in on a broomstick. "This is Mr. Spurg, the seeker for the reigning World Cup champions, Canada," Ludo announced loudly. In the match against Scotland, he caught the golden snitch by mere millimeters, helping Canada win the championship. Reaching the center of the field, Spurg held aloft a golden trophy, and the spotlight shone on it. Ludo then began to introduce it to the audience in a professional tone. In Spar's hands, he holds the Quidditch Cup, shaped like Nike, the Witch of Victory from Greek mythology. She wears a Roman tunic, her arms outstretched, clutching a golden snitch. The winning team can keep the cup for 4 years, until the next tournament, when it will be returned to the Quidditch Committee of the International Wizarding Federation to be awarded to the new world champion. Of course, there's an additional rule: whoever wins the World Championship 3 times will keep the cup forever. Alright, enough chit-chat, allow me to introduce the England national team's mascot, Ludo roared. On the right side of the stands, a neat blue square erupted in loud cheers. A group of wizards emerged, their skin smooth and pale gray, with round, bulging eyes on their heads, 4 long, thin legs, and 4 flat, large feet, moonfolk. A group of moonfolk walked to the center of the field, the moonlight shining down, their bodies radiating a silvery glow, bathing the entire stadium in a silvery light. The moonfoxes stood on their hind legs and began to dance with exquisite grace. On the lush grass, a circle 50 meters in diameter was trampled by the moonfoxes, the grass within forming a clockwise spiral pattern. It was a grass circle. All the spectators applauded wildly for the performance of the England mascots. Ludo Bagman's voice rang out again like a booming bell. Next, let's welcome the Transylvanian mascots. The temperature in the stadium suddenly plummeted, and everyone felt a chill. A group of black magical creatures slithered into the stadium like serpents, looking eerie, like flowing black cloaks. They were groundbats, magical creatures unique to Transylvania. They were vampires, and like dementors, almost no magic could deal with them, but Patronus charms were extremely effective. Therefore, a group of aurors were already standing by the field, ready to use Patronus charms to drive away these dangerous groundbats should they attack the spectators. However, the groundbat had already eaten its fill of sheep's blood before its appearance and had no appetite. As the performance ended, the players from both teams rode into the arena on firebolts, instantly winning enthusiastic cheers from the supporters. Judging from the cheers, most were British fans. After all, this was England, the home advantage was obvious. The British wizards were all looking forward to a thrashing of the week. A short, lean wizard strode onto the field. It was the Egyptian wizard Hassan Mustafa, the Quidditch referee for this opening ceremony. Mustafa opened the large wooden box tucked under his arm, and the quaffle, the runner, and the golden snitch shot into the air. He also mounted his broomstick and flew after the balls, blowing his silver whistle at the same time. The match has officially begun, Ludo shouted excitedly. The quaffle is on England's side now. England's Ibike is dribbling the ball, heading straight for Transylvania's goal. He looks to be in good form. Ibike passes to Atlan. Hearing that Atlan had the ball, his fans cheered. That's right, let's give a shout out to the Butcher of Andorra, the Grim Reaper of Luborgson, the Nemesis of Gibraltar, the Jade-faced Assassin of Cyprus, the Eternal Nightmare of Malta, and the legendary number 7 of England. Atlan, Ludo suddenly became excited. Atlan dribbles past two players, he's heading straight for the goal. It's only been 30 seconds, is he about to score? But the cheer stopped abruptly because Atlan was dispossessed. Ah, no, the quaffle was intercepted by Warrington. It's Transylvania's Warrington, he's surging forward on the pitch. Wow! A beautiful 50-meter long pass. Andrew received the quaffle, he's unmarked. He scores, 10-0 Transylvania. The opponent scored in just 40 seconds, leaving the English fans stunned. What happened to the promised easy win? A bad feeling suddenly crept into their minds. Chapter 515 R&M, Refund. In a Quidditch match, different nicknames are given for each goal a player scores. 2 goals are called a brace, 3 goals a hat trick. When someone scores 9, they're jokingly said to have gone easy on them. That's enough. But if they score 10 or more, the evaluation plummets, becoming poor sportsmanship. A stomp on weaker teams. How can sportsmanship be good? However, the British fans in the stadium hoped the English players would show poor sportsmanship. After all, their opponent was the bottom-ranked Transylvania team, whose salaries were far lower than England's. Wouldn't it be fair to the fans if they didn't crush them by a 3-digit margin? But as Transylvania scored first, the audience quickly realized something was wrong. They were indeed stomping on weaker teams, but it was England who were being stomped on. In just half an hour, the England national team conceded 13 goals to Transylvania with absolutely no sportsmanship, bringing the score to 130-0. The audience was completely stunned. Were they the underdogs? Seeing a chaser skillfully dodge the quaffle using a sloth-like roll, and toss it into the basket, Fudge in the penthouse cheered. Beautiful goal. Beside Fudge sat a group of officials, including British wizards and ministers from other countries. They watched Fudge's continuous cheers, somewhat bewildered. England was being thrashed, and the Minister of Magic from Britain was clapping? Whose minister were they anyway? Had they lost their minds, or were they secretly betting on Transylvania to win? Umbridge leaned closer and whispered, Minister, the team in blue is England, the team in purple is Transylvania. Huh? Fudge was startled. So the team being brutally defeated was England? No, impossible, absolutely impossible. Before the match, Ludo had told him that England was invincible in training matches and was aiming for the World Cup title, and had even told him to bet on England to win. How was this different from the script? Fudge felt a dull ache in his chest at the thought that his celebration had been for the opponents. Seeing the minister's expression, Umbridge immediately asked with concern, Mr. Fudge, are you alright? Why don't you go and rest for a while? I'm fine, Fudge said through gritted teeth. Seeing Transylvania get another penalty, he, who had just praised the referee's fairness, angrily exclaimed, "What's wrong with this referee? Did he bribe the referee? Why didn't he give England a penalty?" Umbridge was suspicious. Just now, number 7, Atlan, had choked his opponent, knocking him off his broom. Such a malicious act, not awarding a penalty, was already a favor from the referee. How could he possibly give England another penalty? If he did, it wouldn't be a trifle call, but pure corruption. But Fudge didn't care. In his view, if England didn't get 20 more penalties than their opponents, the referee had taken bribes. Why didn't they use an English referee? Fudge asked again. Umbridge, though a die-hard Quidditch fan who only plays once every 4 years, had crammed a fair amount of knowledge and carefully explained, Quidditch World Cup referees have a recusal rule. The referee cannot be from the same continent as either of the two teams participating in the tournament. Hassan Mustafa is an Egyptian wizard, and a referee appointed by the Quidditch Committee of the International Confederation of Wizards. Upon hearing International Confederation of Wizards, Fudge fell silent, slumping into his chair, his eyes blankly staring at the field. He'd messed up. He'd tried to show off, but ended up exposing his backside. Although Ralph knew the favorites often lose and didn't think England would win, he hadn't expected them to be so thoroughly thrashed by the small Transylvania team. The match looked like a Hufflepuff versus Ravenclaw Quidditch match, as easy as a father beating his son. "Rove, this just shows you haven't watched enough games," Professor McGonagall, a 50-year veteran football fan, commented sharply. "The England national team never disappoints when it comes to being disappointing. This team is missing a gene," Margaret joked. "Who's Gene?" Shirley asked curiously. "The former captain of the England Quidditch team. He's famous for his malicious files," Rove explained. "When they're down by 30, Gene will encourage his teammates to push harder. When they're down by 50, he'll berate the batter for not being strong enough and give key opposing players special attention with his body. When they're down by 100, the opposing chaser will be crippled by Gene's flying kick." Jokes aside, England is indeed playing like cowards right now. Apart from that chokehold just now, they're either faking fouls or diving recklessly, like a delicate flower in the penalty area. Oh no, another goal. The score has widened to 240-0. Ludo, the commentator, has also lost his initial enthusiasm. He'd placed a lot of bets on England, and after the commentary, he'd probably be looking for a good spot on the rooftop. What England needs to do now is break their score and drought, avoid being shut out. This is absolute adversity. Who can step up? Atlan has the ball again. He's surrounded by 3, pass it. "You selfish, cough cough, unique goal-scoring machine." Atlan was dispossessed again, and he dived again, trying to draw penalty. Perhaps out of consideration for the host nation, Hassan Mustafa finally blew the whistle. Atlan takes the penalty, a determined look, Ludo prayed, hopefully he can score. "Goal," Ludo roared, a sonic boom at the penalty spot, a beautiful shot, the curve almost grazed the goalkeeper's head. "Big heart. In dire straits, you still have to rely on me." Ludo's voice trailed off as the whistle blew, and Transylvania's seeker had just raised his arm. He caught the golden snitch. The match ended, 390 hours, and 10 minutes. When England captain Atlan landed on his fiery crossbow, his eyes were no longer resolute, but somewhat lost. "Who am I? Where am I? Was this the England team we crushed with 390 points? No one expected that the England team, on whom we placed such high hopes, would pull off such a shocking upset in the opening match, falling to Transylvania." Ludo sighed. "Although it's regrettable that we didn't achieve a result that everyone was satisfied with. I believe these lads will adjust their form and prepare for the next match." Ludo's words were drowned out by the clamor of shots from the stands. "England team, have you done right by us? Have you done right by us? RNM, refund our money." Chapter 516 Merlin Medal Award Ceremony. England's crushing defeat to Transylvania was an unprecedented upset. Therefore, this night was destined to be turbulent. Indeed, on the way back to their tents, a mere few hundred meters, Rove and his team encountered over a dozen brawls. Most of those attacked were fans wearing England jerseys. Fans of Captain Atlan, in particular, were mobbed by fans of other teams. The pre-match champagne had been poured too early and too aggressively. Now, losing to a weak Transylvania team, the backlash was particularly swift. Not to mention, many England fans, under the banner of "not supporting England means you're not British," were indiscriminately attacking other teams, already provoking widespread anger. Now that England had lost, and everyone had gained citizenship, the intensity of the outrage was unprecedented. Many fans were burning England players' jerseys, cursing them to crash while riding flying broomsticks. Even more extreme individuals had gone to the locker room, preparing to intercept the England national team players. Fudge had to send hours to protect the players from assassination by extremist fans, though he secretly hoped they would die. Besides the fans needing to vent their frustrations, bettors who had bet on England to win were already busy wiping away tears as they searched for the highest point in the stadium to jump. However, there were so many wizards threatening to jump that if you arrived late, you'd have to wait in line. The opening match turned the Quidditch World Cup camp into chaos, but this was just the beginning. Many more British wizards hadn't bought tickets to watch the game. What was so interesting about this match was they were crushing the weak. They were sure to wake up to another crushing victory. Many shared this sentiment. The next morning, as they sat at their tables eating breakfast and picked up the latest edition of the Daily Prophet, they saw this headline: a stunning upset. England narrowly loses to Transylvania. Many people, upon first seeing the word narrowly lost, assumed the score was close and that England had suffered an unfortunate defeat. But upon seeing the score of 10-390, their hearts skipped a beat. This was a damn narrow defeat? Why don't you mention Transylvania's narrow victory over England? Fudge wanted to use even more offensive language than beast to describe these players, but the harsher the insults, the more he'd lose face in front of outsiders. He could only temporarily downplay it. Thus, numerous articles whitewashing the England team and Captain Atlan began appearing in major newspapers. England tries out new formations in first match, team still has unlimited potential. England lost, but Atlan didn't. A disappointing loss despite a 10-point victory possessing two superstars, one tall and one fast, yet still expecting a 30-year-old veteran to save the world. Fans, of course, weren't buying it. In a poll in the sports section of the Daily Prophet, over 3,000 people gave Captain Atlan the lowest possible score, 2 points. However, 2 points was the newspaper's limit, not Atlan's. To quell public anger, Atlan had no choice but to give an interview, stating that they would not lose a single game and would advance smoothly to the quarterfinals. But wizards who make such wishful thinking predictions rarely have a good ending. As expected, in the next 3 matches, the England national team lost to Peru, then Mauritania, then Morocco, and then no one lost. England's journey through the World Cup, from the opening match, the focal point, the do-or-die match, the honor match, to the train match, and finally, a rematch 4 years later, ended easily. Of course, it wasn't entirely without its benefits. Many Britons heard of Transylvania and Mauritania for the first time and never forgot them. They learned geography from the England team. Along with England, the defending champions, Canada, also went home in the group stage. They couldn't escape the champions' curse, losing to Egypt in extra time in the final match and being eliminated from the knockout stage. Scotland, on the other hand, stumbled their way into the quarterfinals alongside Ireland. Thus, the group stage was completely over. For someone like Ralph, who didn't have a favorite team, the recent matches had been quite enjoyable. Of course, besides watching the games, he still made sure to treat the mascots every day. Their poison had been neutralized, but that didn't stop Ralph from using that as an excuse to approach them. As the saying goes, wildflowers always smell sweeter than garden flowers. Luring other people's magical creatures is the most exciting part. Ralph visited many times, even becoming familiar with the 100-plus villa, and discussing the issue of half villa in depth several times. At this moment, standing beside a group of ghouls, Ralph was examining one of the anorexic ghouls. Ghouls were mascots brought from Mauritania. They were ugly creatures, slimy, with buck teeth, and constantly making noises that were quite annoying. After examining the ghoul that refused to eat, Ralph frowned and said, "It's pregnant, only 2 weeks." Sherry, standing nearby carrying a suitcase, also frowned, puzzled. "I heard Mr. Diggory say that the ghouls brought from Mauritania are all female. How could it be pregnant?" Indeed, 2 weeks pregnant meant this ghoul had conceived on the Quidditch pitch, but with female ghouls all around, it was impossible. Ralph fell silent, exchanging a glance with Sherry. They both looked simultaneously at the invisible beast in the next cage. "The invisible beast did it," the ponytail girl exclaimed in shock. "It should be." Ralph was somewhat speechless. They could even eat such an ugly ghoul. These invisible beasts were truly indiscriminate eaters. What kind of magical creature will be born from the union of an invisible beast and a ghoul? Sherry asked curiously. It will produce cloaked creatures, Ralph said. They're tall, silver-furred animals, like bears. Unlike ordinary animals, magical creatures don't have reproductive isolation, so most magical creatures can interbreed. Of course, this is forbidden by the Ministry of Magic, because the hybrid magical creatures are mostly violent and extremely prone to harming people. Just as Ralph and Sherry were discussing how to deal with the ghouls, Fudge strode in. "Ralph, I knew you'd be here," Fudge smiled, handing the boy a letter. Ralph took it and found it was a pale yellow letter with a wax seal and an intricate silver W engraved on it. "The Merlin Medal Award ceremony will begin tomorrow night," Fudge smiled. "This is your invitation. Didn't we say it would start after the quarterfinals?" Ralph asked. Fudge's face stiffened slightly. He had indeed originally planned to do so, but considering England's crushing defeat, if Ireland and Scotland were also eliminated after the quarterfinals, holding the award ceremony then would be too embarrassing. Fudge had no choice but to move it forward. After he gave a vague, evasive answer, Rove asked again, "By the way, has Mr. Crouch returned?" "Yes, he has," Fudge nodded. "Barty and Dumbledore came back from Berlin together." "How come? You're quite familiar with him." So. "We rode the same flying dragon ship in Berlin before," Rove smiled. Fudge didn't seem too concerned, only sighing softly. "Hopefully, there won't be any problems with the awards ceremony." Rove gave a mysterious smile and said, "There definitely won't be any problems." Chapter 517 Ralph, no matter how much you scream, no one will come to save you. Ralph had been waiting for Crouch to return from Berlin so he could deal with his son, Barty Crouch Jr., who had slipped through the net. Admittedly, without Peter's help and Bertha Jorkin's intelligence, Voldemort was unlikely to know Barty was still alive, much less allow him to infiltrate Hogwarts as he had in the original timeline. But whether out of caution or to prepare for the worst, Ralph needed to eliminate this threat beforehand. He could also go directly to Crouch's house to arrest Barty while Crouch was out of England. He could do that, but it wasn't necessary. Aside from whether there was any magic in the house, there was also a house elf protecting Barty. A hasty visit would easily alert Crouch and allow him to escape. It was better to wait quietly at the Quidditch pitch, since Crouch would be taking Barty to the World Cup. That would be the best time to make the arrest. With this in mind, Ralph began preparing for the Merlin Medal Award ceremony. Actually, there wasn't much to prepare. When the time came, he would simply go to the stadium, perhaps spend some effort thinking of a few words of thanks. That would be about it. But Margaery clearly didn't think so. A few hours before the ceremony, she called Ralph to her room. When the boy entered, Hermione, who was standing at the door, immediately locked it. Ralph glanced at Hermione, paused for a moment, and saw that she was wearing a blue robe, her tousled hair falling smoothly over her shoulders. She looked very beautiful. The boy had seen Hermione like this before, but this look required a lot of hair serum to maintain, which was quite troublesome, so Hermione rarely dressed like this. Ralph looked at Margaery again, then glanced at Sherry. Faced with such a scene, he carefully sat on the edge of the bed and asked timidly, "What are you doing?" "Nothing much," Margaery smiled charmingly. "We just wanted to ask what you're planning to wear to the Merlin Medal Award ceremony." "Just this robe I'm wearing," Ralph said cautiously. Margaret sized the boy up and down, curled her lip, and said with a look of disdain, "You're going to the awards ceremony in this rags?" Ralph was speechless. His black robe, while not of particularly high quality, was simply tailored and fit him quite well. It couldn't be called rags, could it? "This is a new robe that Madame Morkan had tailored for me. It looks all right, doesn't it?" "All right. I guess." Margaret suddenly raised her voice, glaring at him. "No, it's too shabby. You think you're going to Ephemonia for a sorting ceremony? This is the Merlin Medal Awards ceremony. You're a recipient. You have to wear formal attire." "I didn't bring a formal suit." Ralph shook his head. "It's nothing. I took Sherry and Hermione shopping for clothes the other day, and I gave your measurements to the Tuafin clothing store." Margaret chuckled smugly. "I had them make you over a dozen formal gowns and dresses, and they've all arrived. Take a look and see which one you like." Sherry smiled slightly, then gently opened the dressing room door, revealing a pile of brightly colored, elaborate, and gorgeous gowns. Ralph looked at the dazzling clothes and quickly waved his hand, saying, "These gowns are too." He wanted to say flashy, but changed it to the more subtle high profile. "This is the Merlin Medal Award ceremony, and you're the youngest recipient, so of course you have to be high profile," Margaret said. taking a white and red velvet gown with a gold thread from the hanger. The gown was adorned with dark red gemstones and bright gold ribbons, and the sleeves were draped with gilded spiral decorations. Looking at the flamboyant clothes, Ralph instantly became withdrawn. He declared defiantly, "I won't wear it." "Whoever wants to wear it can," Margaery chuckled, gave Hermione a look, and Hermione immediately obeyed, locking the door with magic. "You're wearing it today, whether you like it or not." Margaery reached out and forcefully pushed Ralph onto the bed, a seductive smile playing on her thin lips. "Surely, Hermione, you two grab his hands, and I'll strip him naked." "Ralph, you'd better not resist. My room is very soundproof. Even if you scream your lungs out, no one will come to save you." Although Ralph resisted fiercely, the enemy was too numerous and too powerful. Forced by the three witches' tyranny, he had no choice but to submit, tearfully changing into the most outrageously flamboyant dress imaginable. The suit looked vibrant on the hanger, but on Ralph, it was blindingly dazzling, as flamboyant as a peacock spreading its tail. Margaery stared at Ralph, her eyes practically glowing. He was already strikingly handsome, but this makeover made him even more dashing, exuding an air of unparalleled nobility. Hermione stared at Ralph, momentarily stunned. Shirley stepped forward, a smile playing on her lips, and gently adjusted the young man's collar. Ralph straightened his back and, taking the opportunity, secretly touched the girl's ponytail. She gave him a light glare, telling him not to touch her in public. "This suit is perfect, it looks amazing," Margaery said with a mischievous grin. "How many witches will be sleepless or contemplating divorce after seeing you tonight?" Margaery wanted the whole wizarding world to know that her brother was not only exceptionally talented but also incredibly handsome, enough to make those witches green with envy. Ralph rolled his eyes and asked curiously, "Why aren't you all dressed so formally? We're a group of friends and family, not here to receive an award, so of course we need to be low-key. If we dressed too formally, wouldn't we overshadow you?" Margaret laughed. That was true. Ralph had seen Margaret dressed up before, and she was always the center of attention whenever she appeared. With Sherry's looks, it goes without saying that she was also dressed casually, just slightly more formal than usual, looking very elegant and pure. Only Hermione had tidied her tousled hair, looking much prettier than before, but her clothes weren't particularly extravagant either. As night fell, the group made their way to the stadium. Ralph, in his flamboyant tuxedo, naturally attracted a lot of attention. Upon arriving at the stadium, Ralph handed his invitation to a staff member, and a loud horn sounded as a salute. Newt and Tina deliberately made way, and Professor McGonagall pulled the oblivious Professor Trelawney aside. The area immediately cleared, leaving only Ralph standing there with the three beautiful witches. Flashbulbs went off as reporters crowded in front of the stadium instantly captured the moment. The next day, almost every newspaper featured this group photo on their front page. Chapter 518 The Importance of Connections. Inside the stadium, everything had been renovated. All Quidditch-related facilities had been removed, and a temporary venue for the Merlin Medal Award ceremony had been set up. Soft carpets covered the lawn, lights illuminated the tables, tablecloths gleamed white, and silver samovars and translucent white porcelain teaware sat on them. Invited guests included dignitaries from various countries' ministries of magic, renowned wizards, Quidditch World Cup sports stars, and award winners and their families. To the strains of an orchestra playing cocktail music, everyone greeted each other, exchanged pleasantries, served tea, and chatted about various topics. Sirius Black, leading Harry, Ron, Ginny, Percy, and others, weaved through the bustling crowd and finally found chairs. It was the first time Harry and his friends had attended such a high-level event. Wizards they had only ever seen in newspapers, on the radio, or even in textbooks were now appearing before them in droves. It felt like a dream. Ron, in particular, sat in his chair and shouted excitedly, "Harry, look, it's Krum. Victor Krum. He's right there. Good heavens, this is the first time I've ever seen him up close." Ron's shouting attracted a lot of attention, and Percy couldn't help but frown and say, "For Merlin's sake, Ron, could you please keep your voice down? Everyone's looking at us, look at you, so naive, but that's Krum, so what if he's Krum?" Percy said dismissively, "He's just a Quidditch player, just a Quidditch player." Ron stared blankly at Percy, seemingly unable to believe his ears. "He's the best seeker in the world, isn't the best seeker a Quidditch player too?" Percy scolded. "Besides, what kind of champion is Krum? Can't you say that after you win the World Cup, Percy? You may be a fake fan, But I completely agree with your opinion, Charlie, who had just returned from Romania, said with a grin. Crumb is indeed very strong, but if we're talking about a best, Ireland's secret on Lynch isn't much worse. Let's talk about who's stronger after winning the World Cup. Don't try to compare now, saying Crumb is better than Peel without a title, and better than Colin with one. Ron was speechless. He quickly looked at the red-haired wizard next to Crumb and awkwardly changed the subject. Who's that guy talking to Crumb? He looks a lot like my Uncle Dominic. Sirius glanced at the man and laughed. Ron, is your uncle also the head of the Auror office at the Norwegian Ministry of Magic? No, not at all. Ron quickly shook his head. His name is Pierce. Sirius grabbed the cocktail, took a sip, and said, back when we were chasing Death Eaters to Iceland, I clashed with him. He'd just graduated from Durmstrang and was still a trainee Auror. Now he's the head of the Auror office in Iceland, only 13 years and he's the head of the Auror office. Percy was somewhat shocked. That's incredibly fast. To be precise, it took 7 years, Sirius corrected. How did he do that? Harry asked curiously. Did Pierce do anything particularly remarkable? I haven't heard of that, Sirius shrugged. But Pierce's father was the former head of the Auror office in Iceland. Harry was speechless. He had thought this guy had some extraordinary talent. Sirius Black joked, so, there's a saying about the Icelandic Ministry of Magic, why the son of the Auror office chief can only be a chief, not a director. Because the director of the Department of Law Enforcement also has a son. Everyone burst into laughter, except for Percy. He nodded thoughtfully and said, connections are indeed very important. Percy felt he lacked political resources to promote him. His father, Arthur, was just the chief of the Office for Prohibiting the Misuse of Muggle Items, a dead-end, unpopular department, offering no help for his promotion. Ron leaned close to Harry's ear and snorted, Percy is ambitious, he's already planned to become Minister for Magic. Harry remembered seeing Percy reading a book called How Prefects Gain Power in Diagon Alley. Percy seemed to be that kind of person after all. Ginny ignored the argument and stood up, constantly looking into the crowd. Charlie chuckled and asked, who are you looking for, Ginny? Looking for Ralph, Ginny replied, looking around. Did everyone say he'd get the Order of Merlin? Why haven't I seen him? Mentioning Ralph, not only Ron but even Percy looked on with envy. They were just there to join Sirius, to broaden their horizons. Ralph, however, was there to actually receive the Order of Merlin. The implications were completely different. Just then, a commotion arose at the entrance. Surrounded by reporters, a group of people entered the stadium, and at the very front was Ralph. Sirius, watching the star-studded young man, whistled, Ralph's here. They stood up, about to walk over, but stopped, for Ralph was already surrounded by a group of wizards. Percy, who had just been envious of Pierce's political resources, was now stunned by Ralph's connections. A group of officials from various countries were greeting him. Even the Minister of Magic, Fudge, had to squeeze through the crowd. Minister Fudge, as if showing off, loudly introduced, Mr. Newt Scamander, the renowned magizoologist. Mrs. Tina Scamander, former Chief of Staff of the Auror Office of the United States Congress, who arrested Grindelwald. Ralph, needless to say, you all know him, he will soon become the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin. Ralph, with a humble smile, politely nodded to everyone. Fortunately, with the entrance of Wizengamot, he was finally freed from endless small talk and frivolous conversation. About 50 wizards entered the stadium, wearing crimson robes with a delicate silver W embroidered on their left breasts. Wizengamot's chief wizard, Dumbledore, walked at the forefront, wearing a magnificent moon-white robe embroidered with many stars and moons, and large jewels on his fingers that emitted a dazzling light. With the appearance of Wizengamot, the stadium fell completely silent, and everyone quickly took their seats. Dumbledore stepped to the front, looked up, and gazed at the crowd through his crescent-shaped spectacles perched on his aquiline nose. He smiled and said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this momentous Merlin Medal investiture ceremony. Thanks to I'm Not the Demon King and a Cappuccino for their generous donations." Chapter 519, The Second Merlin Medal. Standing on a high platform, gazing at hundreds of wizards, Dumbledore spoke calmly and deliberately. "I have heard it said, a race without heroes is unfortunate, but a race with heroes who do not respect and cherish them is beyond redemption, and I wholeheartedly agree. Throughout the ages, countless wizards have made outstanding contributions to the magical world. Their courage and wisdom, their loyalty and fearlessness, have brought about significant changes to our world and have guided and inspired generations to come. They are the heroes of the wizarding race. To express our respect and affection for these heroes, we wish to award them medals, which was the original intention behind the founding of the Order of Merlin. Great wizards have written moving and inspiring stories, but these stories, like film in a camera, may become out of focus, blurry, broken, and forgotten after many years. We also hope that these medals will become shining coordinates, fixing these distant stories in the galaxy, so that they may be passed down to future generations forever. Dumbledore's words were so moving that the audience below the platform applauded several times, interrupting his speech. After the speech, Dumbledore began to loudly announce the names and deeds of this year's laureates, with the attending wizards cheering enthusiastically with each name read. First to receive his award was Mace Goblet, for his heroic act of rescuing a Muggle child from a vampire. Next was Beth Dwyer, for improving the treatment of dragonpox. Both received third-class medals, the easiest to obtain. Lockhart had received this medal for describing methods of prevention in his autobiography. Lockhart claimed those deeds were plagiarized, so the methods were naturally plausible, which is why people believed him. Soon, it was time to award second-class medals. The first wizard to go up was Miranda Goshawk, whose name caused quite a stir. After all, Miranda Goshawk was the author of the Hogwarts textbook Standard Spells. Many thought she was long dead, surprised to find she was still alive. Next, 4 or 5 more wizards went up, but it wasn't Rove's turn yet. He sat calmly in his chair, waiting quietly. Shirley clenched her fists, her expression solemn, looking even more nervous than Rove, the one about to go up to receive the award. Rolf almost laughed, but he held it back, deliberately putting on a serious face, and whispered, "Shirley, I'm so nervous." Hearing this, the girl with the ponytail became even more nervous, but she still encouraged Rolf, saying, "You can take a deep breath and then slowly exhale." Rolf did it, then said with a crying face, "No, I'm even more nervous. I don't want to go up there, my autism is about to kick in." Shirley took her hand off the table, quietly took the boy's hand, and softly comforted him. "Don't be nervous, it's just receiving a medal, just don't look at those wizards below." Rolf's fingertips slid across the girl's fair, smooth hand, and he said in a teasing yet gentle tone, "I'm not nervous anymore." Looking into the boy's cunning eyes and feeling his restless little hand, Shirley knew she'd been tricked and tried to pull her hand away. But Ralph had already gripped her hand tightly, their fingers intertwined, and smiled. "Are you still nervous?" The girl with the ponytail paused, then her lips gradually curved into a smile, and she shook her head, saying, "I'm not nervous anymore, Mr. Ralph Scamander." He exposed the Death Eater Peter Pettigrew's plot and helped Sirius Black, who had been wrongly accused for 12 years, clear his name. Dumbledore's voice suddenly rang out. After Peter Pettigrew's escape, Scamander personally captured and killed him, maintaining the safety of the wizarding world. Upon hearing his name, Ralph gently released Sherry's hand, then looked at Newt and Tina, and smiled. "I'm going up." After saying that, the young man walked straight towards the podium. All eyes were on Ralph, and people began to whisper among themselves. There was no suspense about Ralph receiving the Order of Merlin, at least that's what the wizards in England thought. Of course, after Peter Pettigrew's trial last year, there were many calls to award Ralph Rove the Order of Merlin. However, at that time, many conservative wizards felt he was only 12 years old, too young, and shouldn't be awarded it so early. But after Peter's escape, months of fear and uncertainty, even the Aurors couldn't capture him, and this dangerous figure ultimately died at Ralph's hands. Even the most discerning wizards couldn't find a reason to object. Everyone wanted that damned Order of Merlin to him, and it had to be the first class. However, many foreign wizards were unaware of this and were somewhat surprised to see the recipient so young. The Order of Merlin consists of a grand gold medal and a ribbon, a green ribbon for first class, a purple ribbon for second class, and a white ribbon for third class. It's said that the green ribbon on the first-class medal is a tribute to Slytherin House at Hogwarts, Merlin's alma mater. At least that's how the wizards advertise it every year in their welcome address. Whether that's true or not is unknown. Fudge, holding the green ribbon medal, walked up to Ralph and smiled. "On behalf of the Ministry of Magic, I hereby award Sir Ralph Scamander the Order of Merlin, first class." "Thank you, Minister," Ralph said, tilting his head as Fudge pinned the medal on him. Everyone applauded, and some even whistled. After pinning the medal on him, Fudge whispered, "There's another surprise for you." Ralph raised an eyebrow, wanting to ask something, but Fudge had already gone to a table to retrieve a medal. He could only hurry down the aisle. Not far away, Dumbledore smiled and continued loudly, "The next recipient is Mr. Ralph Scamander." Having heard that name just a minute ago, many wizards thought they had misheard. Even Ralph thought Dumbledore had mispronounced it, so he didn't stop but continued walking down the aisle. Dumbledore looked at the guests and announced loudly, "Mr. Scamander successfully prevented a terrorist attack this July, saving the lives of nearly 100 wizards on a floating dragon ship from a group of dark wizards. For this, the Order of Merlin has decided to award Mr. Scamander the Order of Merlin, First Class." Ralph abruptly stopped, staring at Dumbledore in astonishment. All the wizards in the stadium seemed to have heard unbelievable words, frozen in their seats. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 520 Fudge's Little Thoughts. After confirming that he had received another Order of Merlin and that it wasn't a misunderstanding, Ralph returned to the podium. Fudge gently hung the medal around the boy's neck, a smug smile on his face. Ralph's rescue of the many wizards on the floating dragon ship was enough to earn him the International Wizarding Medal from the International Wizarding Federation. That was beyond question. Since the International Wizarding Medal was a certainty, wasn't a second Order of Merlin inevitable? It was like winning the Nobel Prize for Muggles. Getting an academician title after returning home would be a piece of cake, right? Well, that might not be so easy. In short, Fudge knew very well that Ralph would receive another Order of Merlin. The only tricky issue was his age. Ralph was simply too young. At only 13 years old, he was already the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin, drastically breaking records, and for decades to come, few would likely be able to match him. If a second medal were awarded immediately, it would be unprecedented, and probably never to be repeated. Many officials in Wissangamori had reservations, feeling it was better to postpone the awarding of medals until Ralph came of age. But Fudge disagreed. After last year's publicity, Ralph had gained considerable influence in Britain, and the wizards he had rescued were representatives of various ministries, a significant political asset. Fudge had always wanted to cultivate a closer relationship with Ralph. Wasn't this the perfect opportunity? Therefore, he proposed awarding Ralph 2 medals directly, and had Wissangamori convene a meeting to discuss the matter. Fudge also approached Dumbledore and other wizards with whom he had good relationships, and after several meetings, finally pushed the matter through. Of course, there would be controversy, but that was exactly what Fudge wanted. Otherwise, how could he make Ralph feel his hardship and his deep love for him? With this back and forth, how could Ralph not support his candidacy for Minister of Continuing Education, and even later, the presidency of the International Confederation of Wizards? Fudge's plans were meticulous, even extending to 2023. The entire venue recovered from its shock, and whispers rose and fell, causing the stadium to tremble. "Fuck you," Ron couldn't help but swear to express his astonishment. That's the Order of Merlin. Many wizards never even earn a third-class medal in their entire lives. Yet Ron not only received a first-class medal, but 2 at once. Indeed, the saying goes, the difference between people is sometimes greater than that between a person and a dog. As the ceremony concluded, the atmosphere reached its peak, with thunderous applause and cheers erupting. The magical ceiling twinkled with stars, and countless dazzling fireworks rose into the sky. The cheers lasted for several minutes, until people's hands felt numb, before gradually subsiding. Ralph returned to his seat and, seeing everyone staring at the medals around his neck, took them off and tossed them lightly onto the table, laughing. "You can all look at them." Marjorie picked up one medal and examined it closely, while Sherry picked up another. Hermione also leaned over, saying with concern, "Ralph, be careful. What if you break it?" "It's fine," Ralph said casually, sitting back in his chair. "My grandfather has an Order of Merlin medal, and my grandmother has a Congressional Cross. I saw her use it to prop up a table leg last time, so if this thing breaks, it breaks." Hermione sighed softly. For some reason, she really wanted to punch Ralph and then use her size 32 feet to stomp on his hateful face and rub it hard. Serves you right for being so cocky. Not long after Ralph sat down, Fudge dragged him off to socialize, solemnly introducing the boy to group after group of guests. In their conversation, He deliberately emphasized a close relationship, making them seem very intimate. Passing Sirius's table, seeing Ginny waving, Ron took the opportunity to sit down and rest for a while. The moment the boy sat down, Percy was so excited he could hardly breathe. He leaned forward, shook his hand tightly, and said in a pretentious tone, "Ron, it's so good to see you. Congratulations on receiving 2 Order of Merlin medals, that's amazing." Ron suppressed a laugh and said, "Thank you." Ginny rolled her eyes at Percy, who seemed to sense it and immediately turned to look at his sister. The little girl's expression changed instantly, and she smiled broadly, saying, "Ron, your outfit is really nice." Ron picked up a cocktail, took a sip, and said, "Whether it's nice or not, I'm not wearing it anymore." "Why not?" Ron asked, puzzled. If he had such a nice suit, he could wear it for a lifetime. Sirius, having been there before, chuckled knowingly. "Rover is too handsome. His face alone could charm a bunch of witches. And dressed so flamboyantly, looking like a tempting lady, those witches would be even more eager to pounce on him and devour him on the spot." Rover sighed. It was true, he'd only been wandering around for a moment, and he felt like he'd been subjected to countless fiery gazes from a group of witches. During the handshake, Rover received several little notes with the location of his tent written on them, hinting that he could come over for a deeper discussion about ball skills. "Where are George and Fried?" Rover asked again. "I haven't seen them." Everyone at the table laughed, except for Percy, who kept a straight face. "They're grounded by Mom. Their open water ales grades aren't very good," Ginny said gleefully. "Not ideal," Percy sneered. "They each only passed 3 OWLs. Even if I deduct half of my certificates, I'm still on par with both of them combined." That was true. Percy was a top student, having earned 12 OWLs certificates. "Ron, Ginny, you two better study hard, don't end up like George and Fred," Percy, adopting the air of an older brother, lectured. "Those two are just wasting their days. After graduation, they won't even be able to get into the Ministry of Magic's worst centaur liaison office." Ron grumbled unhappily. "You're such a good student, but I haven't seen you do that well." "You're still researching cauldrons at the Ministry of Magic, aren't you?" "What do you know?" Percy retorted angrily. "I'm researching a major international issue. We must enact some kind of international law, otherwise the market will be flooded with counterfeit and substandard products. The cauldrons have thin bottoms, are fragile and easily broken, seriously endangering." Seeing the two arguing, Ron changed the subject, asking, "What were you talking about?" "The England Quidditch team," Harry quickly said. "We were discussing how to make it rise. I think we need to start with a coach." Charlie shook his head. "If the coach isn't good, everything else is useless." Ron swirled his wine glass and smiled. "Don't worry about that. The coach has already been taken care of." Everyone was somewhat bewildered. Their idea of starting with a coach might be different from Ralph's. Ralph lowered his voice and revealed, "I just heard it from Fudge. The England team's coach and seeker have been arrested." "What happened? Did they fix the match?" Harry asked. "No," Ralph shook his head. "They were involved in betting on themselves to win from the goblins." Chapter 521 Sneak Attack. Hearing Ralph say that the England coach bet on him to win, everyone was starting to get tense. You might as well have fixed a match, they thought, at least then everyone would have some consolation, thinking it wasn't that England was bad, but that there were bad guys in the team. But now it was proven that England hadn't fixed a match, they were genuinely bad. While everyone remained silent, Ginny suddenly asked curiously, "By the way, Ralph, who are those 2 girls sitting next to you and Sherry?" It was common knowledge that Ralph was popular with women at Hogwarts, but his only truly close female friends were Sherry and Hermione. They sat together in class and went to the library together after class, plus Neville, forming a true inner circle that others couldn't easily join. Seeing 2 more beautiful girls next to Ralph, Ginny was naturally incredibly curious. The blonde woman, needless to say, had a terrifying aura, and every move she made had a seductive quality. Ginny only stared at her for a moment, and she felt like she was about to be swayed by her. The girl with soft, brown hair, though not as beautiful as Sherry and the blonde, was still quite striking, the kind of girl whose beauty grew on you. Judging from Ron's playful interactions with them, their relationship seemed quite close. Women are naturally curious and gossipy, and Ginny's gossip was already burning brightly. Everyone else at the table also perked up their ears, listening intently. Ron was especially eager to know where Ron knew so many beautiful girls. "The blonde girl is my sister Margaret," Ron introduced. "Your sister?" Ginny asked in surprise. "I've never seen her before." "Margaret is Alvermore's student, so you don't know her." Ron smiled, then winked. "As for that brown-haired girl, you don't know her." Everyone shook their heads. "She's a Hogwarts student." Ginny was a little puzzled. Such a beautiful girl. If she were a Hogwarts student, she shouldn't have no recollection of her. Ralph's lips curled slightly, and without keeping them in suspense, he said, "She's Hermione." This time, not only Ginny, Harry, and Ron were stunned, but even Sirius, who had been watching the scene unfold, was shocked, staring at Ralph with disbelief, then at Hermione in the distance. They had all seen Hermione before. Their impression of her was that she always carried a pile of books, had prominent front teeth, and messy hair, completely different from the person before them. Ron's eyes widened even more, exclaiming, "She got plastic surgery." "No." Ralph frowned. "Hermione just doesn't like to dress up." "Don't say things like that." Ralph chatted for a little longer before getting up to leave and heading towards the restroom. After he left, Ginny immediately scolded, "Ron, if you can't speak properly, don't talk nonsense. Nobody thinks you're mute." "She doesn't look like Hermione at all," Ron muttered. Ginny glared at Ron with displeasure. "Hermione and Ron are good friends. You spoke ill of his friend in front of him, and he didn't get angry. That's already showing good temper." "Hermione and I are friends too," Ron retorted. "What friends?" Ginny rolled her eyes. "Do you and Hermione exchange more than 3 sentences in a semester? You're just classmates." Ron was speechless for a moment, then couldn't help but glance at the pretty Hermione in the distance. To avoid further harassment, Ron deliberately chose a secluded restroom. Just as he reached the door, he suddenly heard someone call out, "Mr. Scamander." The boy turned around and saw a witch running towards him. The woman was probably in her 30s, with soft blonde hair combed high like a cannon. She wore a black velvet open-chested dress, revealing her full shoulders and breasts, which looked like they were carved from old ivory. "Mrs. Karst, hello." Rove narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Is there something you need?" This Mrs. Karst was a widow. Her husband had died of drastic pox, leaving her a large sum of gold. The woman stared intently at Rove, her voice filled with longing. "Mr. Scamander, I'd like to take a good look at your medals. The washroom stalls are quite nice, no one will disturb you." "Do you have time now?" Rove frowned, ignoring her low-cut neckline, and directly refused. "I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. I'm not in the mood right now." "You should rest when you're tired," Mrs. Karst invited with a charming smile. "My tent is only 200 meters from the stadium. If you don't mind, why don't you come and rest in my tent for a while? I can also give massages." "I can give you a massage." As the witch spoke, she gently lifted her skirt, revealing her shapely thighs beneath. She continued to lift it, leaving white lace trim. Rove's hair stood on end. The warning from his spider sense made him wary. Sure enough, the true intentions were revealed. As the witch's skirt rose to her waist, she suddenly reached into the lace and pulled a wand, pointing it at the boy. A beam of white light flashed, and at the same time, another spell shot insidiously from behind, creating a pincer attack. Ralph sneered, and almost without hesitation, leaped high into the air, not only dodging the 2 straight, deadly spells but also casting a stunning spell on Lady Carster. Lady Carster was sent flying backward, crashing into the aisle, sliding more than a meter after landing. The 2 beams of white light paused briefly in mid-air before changing direction and rapidly advancing, heading straight for Ralph in mid-air. Clearly, there was another wizard, concealed in the shadows, though it was unclear whether they had used an illusion charm or an invisibility cloak, making their location impossible to pinpoint. However, the corridor was only so big. The boy, suspended in mid-air, remained expressionless. He inhaled, exhaled, and then, a powerful gust of wind, stirring up countless dust particles, rushed forward. The wind blades dispersed the white light and tore through the walls like tofu, leaving barely visible grooves. A silver shield suddenly lit up not far away, blocking the wind blades. Without hesitation, Ralph flicked a ball of blue-white electricity, shooting it towards the silver shield. Just then, a woman's hoarse voice suddenly rang out from a distance. Avada Kedavra! Ralph reacted quickly. He tilted his head, dodging the green light, and then waved his wand in that direction, shouting, "Stun!" However, the wizard was very experienced in combat and had already moved his position, causing the stun spell to miss completely. The silver shield shattered instantly, and the thick blue-white electricity continued forward, hitting no one but instead blasting the door at the end of the corridor. Ralph stared at the empty corridor, his brow furrowing. Chapter 522 Weakness. After the stunning curse missed, Ralph didn't attack again, but instead gently waved his wand. Mystic Eye, come here. He had just swept the corridor with magic. Most people would choose to use defensive spells to block the wind blades. The attacker did indeed summon a defensive silver shield, but instead of placing it in front of him, it landed a little further away, using this as a feint to lure Ralph into attacking that direction. Ralph did indeed fall for it. She then unexpectedly used the killing curse, and if it weren't for the boy's spider sense warning, he might have already been hit. The most terrifying thing was that even when the person was hit by the wind blades, she endured it without making a sound, to avoid revealing her position. Clearly, this was an attacker with rich combat experience and ruthlessness towards herself. Finding her location was the top priority. And that Mystic Eye, which could see through invisibility cloaks and disillusionment charms, was the best weapon in battle. However, Ralph never expected to be attacked while attending an awards ceremony, so he didn't carry the Mystic Eye with him, but kept it in his box. Fortunately, the box was in Shirley's hands, not far from here. A moment later, the glass eyeball was summoned by a summoning spell and landed in the boy's hand. Ralph picked up the magic eye, pressed it to the corner of his eye, and looked ahead, but unfortunately, the corridor was empty. The boy didn't mind, continuing to use the magic eye to carefully examine every corner of the corridor, quickly finding what he was looking for. Ralph flew forward, landed on the ground, and then crouched down, staring at the dark red bloodstain on the ground. The witch had used her silver shield to deflect the wind blades, but she had also endured them. If she hadn't been wearing fairy armor, injury would have been inevitable. Ralph waved his wand, and the bloodstain, almost frozen by the wind blades, turned into a few drops of dark red blood, slowly floating up. He then conjured a small bottle, letting the blood droplets roll into it. Just then, he heard familiar, light footsteps behind him. Ralph turned around and saw a slender figure with a ponytail rushing towards him. "I'm alright," Ralph said. Shirley breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing the Mystic Eye fly out of the box, she realized something was wrong and followed it. Margaret followed closely behind, raising an eyebrow at the sight of the unconscious Lady Garster, her skirt billowing to her waist, her clothes disheveled. Ralph quickly explained, giving a brief account of the events. "Did you see the attacker with your Mystic Eye?" Shirley asked concernedly. Ralph shook his head. "They ran away after missing their target. Think carefully. Have you offended any witches?" Margaret said, kneeling down to straighten Lady Garster's clothes. Hermione had gone to fetch the Aurors. If they came and saw such a scandalous scene, it would be difficult to explain. Hearing Margaret's words, Ralph did indeed think carefully. If he had offended anyone recently, it was Narcissa Malfoy. Although Ralph hadn't done anything excessive to Narcissa, he had controlled her body, so she inevitably harbored resentment. And then there was Rita Skeeter. Ralph had brutally violated her in the German Ministry of Magic's restroom, though that woman certainly wouldn't dare assassinate him. Those saints were also entirely possible. Well, Ralph had offended quite a few wizards. Or perhaps he used Polyjuice Potion to transform into someone else and deliberately lure you in, the girl with the ponytail suggested. Ralph nodded slightly. That was indeed a possibility. Just then, Hermione rushed in, bringing 7 or 8 Aurors with her, blocking the narrow corridor. "What happened?" Fudge's voice rang out from afar, and a passage opened in the crowd, allowing the minister to approach. He saw Mrs. Karst lying on the ground and gasped. "What happened?" "A wizard attacked me," Ralph said calmly. "Mrs. Karst?" Fudge exclaimed in shock. How could she be? Mrs. Karst was a notoriously seductive and beautiful widow. How could she possibly be a dark wizard? Could it be that Lady Karst had taken a liking to Ralph and wanted to force herself on him in the restroom, to get a taste of this young heartthrob, but failed? Fudge wondered to himself. No, Ralph shook his head. Lady Karst was probably controlled. The attacker was someone else, but I couldn't see their face clearly, the boy quickly explained. Fudge paced back and forth, then said angrily, "Darlis, what kind of security did you do? How could you let a dark wizard into the venue? This was the Merlin Medal Award ceremony, such an important occasion, and a dark wizard had infiltrated to launch an attack. And the victim was Ralph, who had just received 2 Merlin medals. If something went wrong, the British Ministry of Magic would truly become a laughingstock." Daly's hurriedly said, "I'll send wizards to seal off the stadium immediately. Don't make a big fuss," Fudge instructed, "and don't let the news leak out. Go quickly." Ralph wasn't optimistic that Daly's could catch the culprit. Since the attacker dared to come, they had probably prepared a magical item like a key to escape. But, could she escape? Ralph lightly flicked the small bottle containing the blood droplets and put it in his pocket. On the high-rise building, the woman landed on the ground, her legs buckling, almost falling. The woman stretched out her finger and gently wiped the crimson blood from her cheek, then smeared the blood on her thick lips. She stuck out her tongue, licked it vigorously, and revealed a chilling smile. A hoarse, deep voice rang out. "I told you long ago, you are no match for Scamander. Don't provoke him, Master, it's my fault." The woman immediately knelt on the ground, humbly saying, "But when I saw that boy, I couldn't help but want to kill him. He's the one who made you suffer so much." HMPH, there will be a chance, a hoarse voice sneered. The woman gazed at the figure with excited, fanatical eyes, saying, "Of course, as long as Master can regain his strength, even just half his former power, even Dumbledore will fear you." Hearing such flattery, the man hissed with laughter. He then asked, "How is the matter I entrusted to you going?" "I've contacted them, Master," the woman said. "They were quite startled when they saw me." "Are those guys still reliable?" the hoarse voice asked. "I've never trusted them, not even after returning to England." "Reliable?" the woman assured him, licking her lips and grinning. "Master, I know them best. We grew up together. They have weaknesses, they'll obey." "That's good." The figure went to a corner, opened a cage, and grabbed the trembling man. Moments later, the man collapsed to the ground, his face still bearing the traces of terror. The tall figure let out a satisfied burp. Chapter 523 The Theory of 10 Victories and 10 Defeats. The Aurors were dispatched to search the stadium and thoroughly investigate any suspicious wizards. The operation looked impressive, but by the end of the awards ceremony, they had found nothing. This was understandable. Not only did the witch who dared to attack have a foolproof escape plan, but even if she were still in the crowd, given Fudge's order to avoid a high-profile operation, it would be strange if the hesitant Aurors could catch the attacker. Of course, it wasn't entirely fruitless. While searching the boxes in the stadium, the Aurors apprehended many male and female wizards, and even male wizards, who had met at the banquet and were discussing sports. Fudge even spotted his wife and sister-in-law in the crowd, an unexpected bonus. But they insisted they were just there for a run, so what could Fudge do but forgive them? They also didn't get much information from Lady Karst. Just as Ralph had guessed, she was under the influence of an imperious curse and knew nothing about it. Thus, the attack ended inconclusively. Fudge actually wanted to launch a major investigation, but a large-scale operation would inevitably lead to the news spreading. The attack on Scamander at the awards ceremony was a major scandal for the Ministry of Magic, severely damaging Fudge's prestige. Moreover, it was during the Quidditch World Cup. If the news got out, it would cause panic among the audience. Would tickets still sell? Would the tournament still proceed? For Fudge at this point, stability was paramount. He could only plead with Ralph to keep quiet and understand the Ministry of Magic's predicament. As compensation, the news that Ralph received 2 Order of Merlin medals became the daily headline. The Order of Merlin was an organization founded by Merlin in the Middle Ages, its earliest members coming from King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. After King Arthur's death, the Order of Merlin disbanded. Later, to recognize wizards who made significant contributions to magical society, Wizengamer took on this responsibility, forming a temporary Order of Merlin annually to present awards. Each vote requires a 2/3 majority to award a wizard the Order of Merlin. Therefore, obtaining the Order of Merlin is extremely difficult for a wizard. Even a wizard as powerful as Dumbledore only received a first-class medal after defeating Grindelwald in 1945. Ralph, at almost 14 years old, received 2 first-class medals, an unprecedented feat, causing a great sensation in Britain. It was undoubtedly a bold decision, and while controversial, it elevated Ralph's fame to unprecedented heights. Newspapers even began debating whether Scamander or a young Dumbledore was more talented. Such blatant comparisons made Ralph blush. Meanwhile, the Quidditch World Cup was in full swing, but British fans weren't paying much attention. No wonder, the results were too dismal. 4 British teams qualified for the Quidditch World Cup. Before the competition, everyone was generally optimistic, with some Quidditch experts even pointing out that the 4 teams were the strongest British teams ever. likely sweeping the top 4 spots. But England, the team on whom everyone placed high hopes, was eliminated in the round of 16, returning home in disgrace and setting a new record for the worst performance by a host nation, a devastating blow to most British fans. The subsequent quarter-final draw saw Scotland, Ireland, and Wales avoid an all-British clash, a result widely considered a perfect draw. Fans then hoped that the 3 British teams would advance to the semi-finals together and jointly defeat Bulgaria. Then, Scotland suffered a heavy defeat to Luxembourg, and Wales suffered a crushing defeat to Uganda, both exiting in the quarter-finals. Only Ireland managed a hard-fought victory to reach the semi-finals. Fans fell silent, abandoning any fantasies of an all-British final. Fortunately, Ireland performed admirably, defeating Peru amidst the pessimism and securing a place in the final against Bulgaria. British fans were once again excited, enthusiastically discussing the upcoming final. Every day, major newspapers analyzed historical records. However, the last encounter was 250 years ago in the group stage. At that time, both teams were eliminated in the round of 16. This wasn't very relevant. Experts could only indirectly assess the strength of teams by comparing those they had faced. One commentator even asserted, Ireland had 10 wins, while Bulgaria had 10 losses. Of course, British fans didn't forget to criticize England, with similar questions appearing during every broadcast Q&A session. Please name the worst Quidditch national team and explain why it's England. In this heated atmosphere, Rove didn't encounter any further attacks, and naturally, he couldn't catch the attacker. But it didn't matter. In his box was a sheep-eating beast, a vampire extremely sensitive to blood. After feeding on an animal's blood, it could smell its prey within a radius of tens of kilometers. Rove would give the sheep-eating beast a blood he obtained, and if the witch dared to reappear at the Quidditch World Cup, he would definitely find her. Also missing were the Death Eater mascot handlers. They had been on leave for some time and their whereabouts were unknown, which alerted Rove. He remembered that in the original timeline, a group of Death Eaters attacked the camp late on the night of the final. The only good news was that Ralph had finally met the man he had been longing for. Barty Crouch. Walking through the crowded camp, Sirius and Lupin were both somewhat absent-minded. Or rather, they hadn't yet recovered from their shock. Passing a pyramid-shaped tent, a little boy of about 2 years old, holding a wand, poked a slug in the grass. The slug slowly swelled to the size of a sausage, then popped with a loud bang, the cries and screams finally pulling the two back from their shock. Sirius looked at the boy walking at the front and whispered, "Rover, are you sure? Barty Crouch Jr. is still alive." "Yes," Rover nodded and smiled. "What, you two don't believe me? It's hard to believe, really." Sirius smiled bitterly. "I know Barty Crouch. He'll throw anything that threatens his reputation aside, including his wife and son. I find it hard to imagine him using illegal means to rescue his Death Eater son." "Sirius, humans are complex creatures," Rover said softly. 13 years ago, could you imagine Peter Pettigrew betraying you and James, surrendering to the Death Eaters?" Sirius fell silent. Lupin watched Rover's retreating figure, his expression also becoming complex. When everyone believed Sirius was a traitor, it was Rover who discovered Peter Pettigrew was still alive and exonerated Sirius. When everyone believed Barty Crouch Jr. was long dead, it was Rover who stood up and said, "No, he's still alive." For some reason, Lupin, watching Ralph's retreating figure, seemed to be looking at Dumbledore. They both possessed an air of knowing everything, of having everything under control, a calm and composed demeanor. The boy's back wasn't tall, yet it inexplicably instilled a sense of security. The three quickly arrived at a tent, and Ralph rang the doorbell. Soon, a house elf emerged from the tent, wearing a tea towel used for wiping teawares and sporting a pair of long, bat-like ears. "Hello, my name is Scamander," Ralph smiled. "I have an appointment with Mr. Crouch. Is he in the tent now?" "Yes, he is." The house elf, named Sparkle, drew back the curtain, letting the three into the tent. Chapter 524 Rove, do you want to die, Crouch? Following the house elf Sparky, Ralph and his companions entered the tent. It served as both a living room and a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, and two tables stood, a large writing desk in the center of the room, and a round table with a lamp in the center, surrounded by the latest newspapers and magazines in various languages arranged in a star pattern. Next to the writing desk was a filing cabinet, each drawer marked with gold lettering. "Hey," a wizard exclaimed cheerfully, raising his hands. "A distinguished guest, Ralph immediately recognized Ludo Bagman, who sat on an old-fashioned leather sofa, still wearing a baggy Hornets Quidditch uniform. Barty Crouch sat opposite him, his posture ramrod straight even in his own home, wearing a spotless, crisp suit and tie. Sparkle served 3 more cups of tea and then left. Sirius Black asked with a smile, "Hey, Ludo, what are you doing here?" "I've come to see Barty, Sirius," Ludo said with a grin. "The Minister of Magic from Bulgaria is here, but we can't understand what they were saying, so I came to ask Barty to help translate. He speaks about 150 languages." "What are you doing here?" Crouch also looked at the 3 of them curiously. He had arrived at the camp yesterday and received a letter from Scamander that evening, saying he would be visiting today. The 2 had met on the Flying Dragon ship to Berlin, and Scamander was, in a way, his savior, so Crouch hadn't refused. But Crouch hadn't expected that Ralph would bring Black and Lupin along for the visit. "I've come to catch up with Mr. Crouch," Ralph said, sitting politely on the sofa. "And I'd like to discuss an old case with him." Hearing the word old case, Crouch frowned, his expression turning serious. "If it's about the Peter and Sirius case, I was indeed too hasty back then, failing to conduct a trial. However, I think I've already apologized." "Ralph, Sirius, let's just leave that behind," Ludo chimed in, trying to smooth things over. "Barty has lost his position as director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation and has received his due punishment." "Yes, Sirius was only imprisoned in Azkaban for 12 years, while Mr. Crouch lost his position as director," Ralph chuckled. "That punishment is indeed a bit too harsh." Hearing the boy's sarcastic tone, Crouch's brow furrowed even more. He said coldly, "So, what exactly do you want? Are you only satisfied if I completely lose my position in the Ministry of Magic?" "That's a good suggestion." Ralph's eyes lit up with approval. He leaned back in his chair and chuckled, "But it's not good enough. I think we could send you to Azkaban and lock you up for 12 years. "Fair enough, right." Crouch's face darkened, while Ludo sighed inwardly, lamenting how naive Ralph was. The Crouch family was an ancient, pure-blooded family, related to many high-ranking officials in the Ministry of Magic. Barty himself had been with the ministry for decades, their connections were vast. A year ago, when the Sirius Black case broke out, even amidst the public outcry, Fudge could only suspend Barty for investigation, ultimately allowing him to return to the ministry without much trouble. A year later, trying to dredge up old grievances, it was impossible to send Barty to Azkaban, even though Ralph had just received 2 Merlin medals and was at the height of his power. "I was just joking," Ralph suddenly laughed, breaking the awkward silence. He chuckled, "Mr. Crouch. We're not actually here for the Sirius Black case, but for another old case." Crouch, however, was in no mood for jokes. His voice grew even colder. "What case?" "The case of your son, Barty Crouch Jr." Ralph's lips curled into a smile. "I suspect he, like Sirius Black, was wrongly accused." This was a bombshell. Not only was Ludo speechless, but even Crouch was stunned. For a long while, Ludo was too shocked to speak, stammering, "Ralph, do you know what you're saying?" "Of course I know," Ralph smiled, leisurely sipping his tea. "I have evidence." Crouch stared intently at Ralph, his eyes bulging. "What evidence?" When Sirius was talking about the past, he said Barty Crouch Jr. earned 12 OWL certificates at Hogwarts and even received a special contribution award. Ralph clicked his tongue. "Your son was academically successful, grew up in a good family environment, and had such a capable father like you. He clearly had the brightest future. How could you become a Death Eater and go down the wrong path?" "Enough," Crouch roared, standing up from his chair, his voice filled with anger. "Oh dear, don't rush me, Mr. Crouch, I haven't finished speaking yet." Ralph stood up and paced slowly around the room. "The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt, and the more I couldn't sleep. So I went for a walk in the camp last night, and guess who I saw?" "Who did you see?" Ludo asked, holding his breath and listening intently. "I saw him." Ralph lowered his voice, a smile playing on his lips. "Barty Crouch Jr." The tent fell silent again. Crouch's face hardened, every line etched on his features, his eyes filled with terror. It can't be," Ludo stammered. "The boy is dead. He died a long time ago in Azkaban." "Ralph, how could you possibly see him? Was he a ghost?" "No, not a ghost," Ralph said with a polite smile, his gaze fixed on Crouch's eyes. "It was the living Barty. He told me he wasn't dead, that he was rescued from Azkaban. He even talked to me about Quidditch, thinking Ireland would win the final. Ludo stared in disbelief, as if listening to a terrifying ghost story. Enough, Crouch roared, each syllable dripping with cold fury. Perhaps Scamander is implying that I rescued my son and brought him home. Yes, that's exactly what I mean, Ralph said with a slightly mocking tone. You're quite clever, Mr. Crouch, understanding my meaning so quickly. A heavy silence followed. Ludo seemed terrified, stammering, Ralph, Mr. Crouch, no, definitely not that kind of person. Crouch suddenly drew his wand. But Ralph was faster, throwing a punch that struck Crouch squarely in the cheek, knocking him to the ground with a thud. He then raised his wand, aiming it at Crouch's head. He looked contemptuously at the man who had once been only a step away from being minister, coldly saying, Do you want to die, Barty Crouch? Chapter 525 Barty Crouch Jr. Ralph's punch was powerful. By the time Crouch recovered from the pain, his mouth was full of blood. He spat out more a broken tooth, wiped the blood from his torn lip with the back of his hand, and roared, Scamander, you have made baseless accusations and attacked an innocent high-ranking official of the Ministry of Magic. I will file charges against you with Wizengamer. You scared me to death. Ralph chuckled, amused. I won't be expelled from Hogwarts, will I? The boy picked up Crouch's wand, twisted it between two fingers, broke it lightly, and tossed it to the ground. Now your crime is compounded, but unfortunately, you, a high-ranking official of the Ministry of Magic, will soon become a prisoner of Azkaban. Ludo, are you just going to watch me get attacked? Crouch's eyes bulged again as he shouted, I believe you remember that throughout my long career, there's ample evidence that I have consistently abhorred and hated Death Eaters. Even my son, if you were a Death Eater, I would never have transferred him out of Azkaban, would I? Ludo looked terrified and said, Ralph, you must have made a mistake. Whether I've made a mistake or not, we'll find out soon enough. Ralph looked at Lupin and calmly asked, Have you found Barty Crouch Jr.? Yes. Lupin removed the mystic eye, which had been concealed by the disillusionment charm, from the corner of his eye. He pointed to the second floor and said, In that room, but that how self-named Sparkle is also in the room, seemingly watching Barty Crouch Jr. Should I go up and grab him? No need. Ralph glanced at Crouch, who was sitting on the sofa, and said in a calm tone, Mr. Crouch, just order Sparkle to bring Barty Crouch Jr. over here. Crouch completely ignored Ralph, simply lowering his head and slumping onto the sofa. The boy gave Sirius a look, and understanding, he raised his wand, pointing it at Crouch's head, and said, Confusion. Crouch shook his head like a drunkard, then mumbled, Sparkle, bring Barty Crouch Jr. over here. A moment later, Sparkle appeared beside the sofa. Seeing Crouch's face covered in blood, she threw herself at him, shouting, You killed him. You killed him. You killed Master. He was just under a confusion charm. Sparkle, Ralph said. Quickly take off Barty Crouch Jr.'s invisibility cloak. Sparkle didn't move, but upon hearing the name Barty Crouch Jr., she showed a look of terror. Under the silent gaze of the others, she suddenly burst into tears of fear. Lupin, holding the mystic eye, strode forward, ripped off the invisibility cloak, revealing a pale-skinned man with messy, light yellow hair. His eyes were closed, seemingly asleep. Ludo gasped. He hadn't expected Barty Crouch Jr., who had been dead for 13 years, to actually be alive. Sirius was the same, even though Ralph had told him Barty was alive. Seeing him in person still left him speechless for several seconds. Mr. Bagman, Ralph suddenly said. Ludo, who had witnessed the whole thing, jumped at the sound of Ralph's voice, quickly rising to his feet and standing beside the boy like a lackey, asking, I'm here. You should know where Minister Fudge is. I need you to call him for me. Tell him the Death Eater Barty Crouch Jr. has been captured. Yes, sir. Ludo, as if receiving a command, immediately ran out of the tent. I'll go get Dumbledore, Sirius said. Ron nodded slightly, then waved his wand, pointing to Barty Crouch's chest, and said, Revive quickly. Barty Crouch slowly opened his eyes, staring blankly at the boy before him. Ron smiled and said, Nice to meet you, Barty Crouch. The camp was filled with vendors, their carts overflowing with strange and wonderful goods, glowing rose-shaped badges representing the Irish and Bulgarian teams, along with their national flags that played their respective anthems when waved, and miniature firebolts that could fly. Harry and his friends, looking at the dazzling array of goods, quickly spent all the pocket money they had. By the way, where did Sirius go? Ron asked curiously. Sirius and Lupin were called away by Ron. Harry had to shout through the noisy crowd. They said they were going to visit Barty Crouch. Barty Crouch. Ron felt the name sounded familiar. He thought for a moment and said, the guy who wronged Sirius. Yes, it's him. Harry nodded. George, now released from confinement, grinned and said, Rover must have taken Sirius and Lupin to cause trouble for Crouch. That's right. Fred nodded, somewhat expectantly. Poor Crouch. Will he get beaten up? They wouldn't dare. Percy said coldly from the side. Do you know how serious the crime is of attacking an official of the Ministry of Magic? In serious cases, it can lead to life imprisonment in Azkaban, but that's Rover. Harry hesitated. He just received 2 Order of Merlin medals. The Order of Merlin medals are just medals of honor, not get-out-of-jail-free cards. Percy scoffed. Besides, with Mr. Crouch's influence in the Ministry of Magic, if an Auror dared to hide him, they would definitely be arrested. Even with his great influence, he was demoted, wasn't he? Ron said unhappily. Mr. Crouch will soon be reinstated as director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation again, Percy said in a low voice. I heard Dad say yesterday that Fudge needs Mr. Crouch's help with translations. He speaks 200 languages. Mermaid, Turkey, and Troll. You said last time it was 150 languages, George said with a grin. 50 more languages in just 1 month. Besides, anyone can speak Troll language, Fred said dismissively. You just have to point at it and make a purring sound. Percy glared at George and Fred and said, anyway, the Ministry of Magic can't do without Mr. Crouch. With his connections, he'll be reinstated sooner or later. Just you wait and see. Does it matter to you whether Crouch is director or not? George asked. Why are you so happy? I ran into Mr. Crouch at the ministry last time, and he praised my hard work, Percy said smugly. Mr. Crouch has remembered me. As soon as he's reinstated, I'll be promoted quickly. Just then, Ludo approached, his expression hurried. Children, where's Arthur? Dad went on patrol, Percy said, noticing Ludo's pale face. What happened? Something terrible, Ludo's voice trembled. Go find Arthur quickly and have him take a healer to Barty Crouch's tent to treat him. Harry was startled and immediately asked, what happened? I can't tell you the specifics, Ludo sighed. But Barty's injuries are quite serious. Ralph knocked out his teeth. The children exchanged glances. Harry, remembering Percy's words, hurriedly asked, hitting someone, will we get arrested? Arrested? Ludo's expression turned grave. He nodded. Definitely. It looks like Barty Crouch is going to be imprisoned in Azkaban for life. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.